Hey, hello, hi, welcome to and or back to the EquiTheory podcast. I am your host, Jill Treese, and this week's episode is part 4. It's part 4. We're finally done. We are concluding the positive reinforcement writing series. It's happened. We are finally done. I'm so sorry it took so long to get all of the parts out, and it's totaling way too many hours, but it's a really expansive topic, and I think it's one of those that deserved a lot of time dedicated to it, you know? And I'm sure in the future I will discuss it as I have more experience with it and also with other guests on the show and getting their perspective because let's face it, writing with the clicker is a really hot topic, but I think Caine and I got the overview and hit on a lot of really important things to consider. And I hope that you guys found it interesting or maybe you want to apply it or not. And maybe it's just a tool that you put in the very back of your toolbox and you never look at it ever again. But maybe that little tool will start working its way forward and you'll be like, oh, what is this thing? And then you'll delve into it further. Come to the dark side. But anyway, I'm not going to waste your time any longer. I don't have any updates or anything. And this is a long AF episode. And my cat is struggling to climb onto my chair. Hi, Zuko. Just tearing it up. It's fine. Anyway, so I'm not going to waste your time. We're just going to get right into this episode. We got to roll the music and do the patron ad. And eventually I will have ads on this episode podcast at some point. But I just don't feel like writing campaigns and proposals. You know, it takes a long time and figuring out like payment and it's complicated. So I'm like, you know what? I'll just do it for the sake of doing it right now. Okay. And the last thing that I do want to say is if you would like to listen to the podcast on YouTube, it is now available on YouTube. And if you don't want to listen to it on YouTube, please, dear God, subscribe anyway. It's EquiTheory on YouTube, just EquiTheory, and you can subscribe there because I have to hit a certain amount of subscribers and watch time before I can start monetizing it, so it would be really, really helpful if you could just do that. Wally's yelling at you to do it too, so I think you should. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to get into this. More of me talking. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. So before we jump into the content is one where you can support me and the horses directly. If you're willing and able, check us out at EquiTheory on your Patreon app or at patreon.com/EquiTheory. When you become a patron of the podcast, you can ask me questions that I'll answer on the podcast for just $5 a month. And at the $10 tier, you can receive merch and have access to live Q&A events, which means you get your questions answered in real time. And at the higher tiers, you have the option for phone call consults with me on air or privately, as well as access to online training with me depending on your tier. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. But lastly, you should know, should you decide to become a patron, you can cancel at any time or subscribe and unsubscribe as you please or as you're able. And if you can't support us through Patreon, no worries at all whatsoever. Listening alone is more than enough. I just want to say thank you to all the current and future patrons. Me and the ponies appreciate it endlessly. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to get into the part where I talk about things that you're actually interested in. Alrighty, guys, we are back for the final installment of this positive reinforcement writing series, and I have Caine on the line, and we are going to be answering some questions that you guys asked. Fair warning, some of them are a bit redundant, but I think they are worth answering anyway, so that, you know, you might hear it in a different way. But a lot of them we might not have covered, or you might be able to guess the answer to. But for whatever reason, we're just gonna proceed and we're gonna answer them. Sound good? Sound good?
It sounds good.
Okie doke. So we'll go ahead and get into the general questions before we move into the specifically written issues. And I'm going to adjust my mic so that my voice is being picked up. Okay. So first question. Dun dun dun. Which is harder, teaching horses or riders to ride with positive reinforcement? Caine, your thoughts?
Okay, it's 100% riders. Reading that just came out. Because, and it's really not so much like humans initially teaching them plus R, but it's because riders, of course, are already taught with traditional, and trying to get them to unlearn everything with traditional, or at the very least like not apply it, is extremely difficult, because it has trained reactions. And if you do ride traditional horses all the time, then yes, it's very good to have those quick reactions, but being humans and being traditional riders, your first instinct is always like to get what you want, or to push into something, or to ask at the very basicness, like off of pressure. And especially if you're going to start working with more plus R horses, you're going to find that bringing too much pressure, or even just bringing pressure to the table, is not going to get any response that you need, and it can be really frustrating. So with people, it's, the patience and just the shaping of your behavior that we as trainers have to teach, whereas horses are just like, horses are natural to it. It caters to horse behavior. So
right.
Yes, it's much harder to teach people.
Right, and I agree. And I think another component of it too is that the mindset shift required to train with positive reinforcement, you don't realize how difficult it is. But like for you and I, we grew up riding traditionally, and I probably rode traditionally for like 10 years. And when you're constantly for years in a mindset of what is the problem? How do I correct it? How do I correct it subtly? How do I correct it quickly so it won't happen again? And just like, it's all looking for the problems instead of focusing on the things that are going right. Because in traditional training, most of the time you don't reward the behaviors you like. You reinforce them by releasing the things that they don't like. And so it gets you in this mindset of where you start to, in some people, you start to see like an adversarial relationship develop, where you're like, oh, my horse is out to get me. He's deliberately not listening. He's being obstinate. He's rude. He's pushy, blah, blah, blah. And that's where you get all those labels, because you started out like the horse is doing something wrong, instead of, maybe he doesn't understand. How can I make this clearer and make him successful? And, obviously some traditional riders ride like that, but it's not the entire basis for it. Whereas with positive reinforcement, you're constantly looking for successive approximations to the right behavior, and then rewarding that and building from it, so you don't have to reward all the little steps in between, and then you're getting your end behavior. And so I think that that's a really big shift. And also our society kind of puts us in this mindset where we're needing to be perfect. You have to hide everything that's going wrong, and you just have to present the best version of yourself. Everything has to be corrected and fixed behind the scenes, and instead of like just kind of embracing the process. And when you get so hyper-focused on fixing all of the bad, you sort of lose sight of appreciating the good. And I think there has to be more of a balance, and positive reinforcement really helps with that, because when you see something going wrong and there is some bad, then you're like, okay, well, what's wrong? Is it pain? Is it fear? Is it confusion? What's happening? How can I fix it? How can we proceed to make the horse successful?
Yeah, and I think another way to really briefly sum it up is similar to like your episode with SD Equus, that it's like stall living caters to human beings. I think traditional riding caters a lot more to human beings, and that's what I mean by horses are so much more natural to pick up on plus R, because plus R caters to the horse and how the horse learns.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, a lot of what we do, like even how we feed horses, is not natural or doesn't cater to their natural ethogram, but we do it because nobody wants to be like all day dispensing some grain or any of the other things that, has to happen, which really wouldn't be that difficult, but whatever. That's not this podcast. So you think we're good to move on to the next question?
I think we are, yeah.
Oh my God, look at us going so fast.
I know.
Okay, so the second question is treating after a round plus R. And I have a little conversation that happened on my Patreon page, and I kind of want to read the discussion. It says, I know a lot of traditional riders and trainers who give treats after training sessions or lessons as a reward. I always hear that you have to mark a behavior within 3 seconds for the horse to understand what he is being rewarded for or corrected for. That makes me think that by the time you've left the arena and removed tack, a treat is just a reward for whatever the horse is doing at that moment, standing there. That's not quite the same timing as feeding after a show run, but I have wondered about that as well. And somebody responded by saying, whether the horse knows that the round itself was good or not, I guess it's still a reinforcer, creating a more positive association with the ring and completing a round than the experience potentially would have been otherwise. And I think that, they're mostly referring to like Joe Stockdale, after his horse exits or finishes jumping, he gives the horse a treat. And I do think that on some level, might be creating a positive association, but it depends on the execution, because if the reason the horse is doing the behaviors is motivated by negative reinforcement, then it's not positive reinforcement.
It's the cherry on top.
Right. And the positive reinforcer would be for whatever the horse is doing in the moment. And, they talk about the 3-second marking, and I think if my horse is doing a trot transition, or maybe that's not even a good, okay, say the horse touches a target with its nose and I click 3 seconds after, it's not going to be very clear. So
that's a long, 3 seconds is a long time.
Yeah. So, and by then the horse has had the opportunity to move away. So, I would say it's even tighter than 3 seconds in most cases. It depends. But largely, I would say that, yes, I think giving the horse a treat after the round is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not telling the horse, the horse is not doing it to get the treat at the end. It has no bearing over the horse's behavior or its motivations.
I think that's the most important thing to say about it, that the horse is not doing the round because he gets that little treat at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely but it depends comes from if the horse had been trained to do the round through positive reinforcement and then gets his reward at the end, then yes, it would be. But if the horse has been trained through negative reinforcement and then just gets a treat at the end, it's not doing anything. And I think the same applies to what the first patron said about when you when you take the horse back to the barn, you remove the tack and you give him a treat. Yes, it's a good sentiment, but the horse is not connecting that to oh, we had a good ride, I'm a good boy, I'll keep doing that more. It's more just whatever the horse is doing. If the horse was pawing or reaching his nose out to you and you give him a treat, that's what you're reinforcing. It's not the round,
Yeah, I liked the train of thought of the first Patreon's answer, or the first patron's answer, because that is correct. It's the timing of it and depending on all that stuff.
Right.
Like we said, it's not that the horse is doing it because he's getting rewarded for the round. I also think for both patrons to maybe make it a little bit clearer for them,
okay.
The treat is never, treating in that scenario is never going to have the horse associate the ring with positivity or the jumping with positivity or whatever that is. It is going to associate you with positivity. The horse is ring-wise or show-wise or performance-wise from that one treat. It's just kind of oh yeah, this rider or this person is friendly to me, this rider gives me treats. So it's still not a bad thing. I love seeing I do see a lot of riders give treats immediately after the round. They usually, especially in the jumpers, they'll keep them in their pockets because it's allowed. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
But that is a positive association with you and the horse and between you and the horse, not between the horse and his environment.
Right, especially if, said rider is coming off of the round, smacking the horse on the neck, giving it big pats, and then gives it a treat.
Yeah.
And lots of big mixed messages there. But I agree. And, I think there's a possibility that if it was done enough, you could associate it with the ring. And if it was generalized, but I would lean more toward agreeing with Caine that it's more, you just get a treat when you walk into the arena, it might reinforce
it goes back into
that.
Showing and horse showing and competing still revolves around humans. There is nothing natural about that to horses and nothing that horses value about that. Even people who say, oh yeah, my horse does so well in the show ring, he loves being at shows. Okay, think about why. There's probably a lot of other horses there. There's probably a lot of space that you're going around. But yeah, that part about it is enjoyable. But shows in as of themselves is they cater to humans, not to horses.
It's how many shows do we all go to and there are paddocks where you can have your horse out with their buddies? You don't. They're stalled all weekend. And because it's for convenience and space sake, and nobody would want to go have to catch their horses. And it's all about human convenience, and there is some merit to that. But at the same time, it's not really about the horses. And most of the time, the reason the horses are so good at what they do is because they understand their training. And, I think that there's a possibility that horses enjoy, I would never know, but at least riding Zoe on cross country, I think she enjoyed it to some degree, but I also have to consider that there were times that I, put my leg on and steered her and gave her no other choice other than to go over the fence. And if given a choice, I don't know what she would have said.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's one of those up in the air things. Like, does my horse love me? I don't know.
Well, that's all right. We can move on.
Yeah. So number 3 is, can you use a clicker while riding? And I guess this is more of a how question, because obviously the answer is yes.
Yes. Like, I personally don't, because I 100% prefer just to whistle or to use my voice, just because it's one less thing that I have to hold. But you can. Like, I think one of my clients has one of those clickers that straps around your wrist. So even then, she's never actually holding it. It's still just there within her hand's reach. Like, yes, it's possible.
Yeah, and I have one of the Karen Pryor clickers that slips around your finger, and I would imagine that would be pretty easy to use. So you could just like have your reins in your hand and it's around your finger, and you can reach over and click with your thumb, or you could use a mouth sound like I use my sound, regular Visco
exactly.
girl. And then I know that, if your horse didn't have a problem with you carrying a target stick, like if there was no whip association, then I know that Shauna Karish carries some clickers that have or a target stick that has a clicker on it, so it's no different than carrying a whip.
Yeah, we have one of those, actually. They're awesome.
Yeah, and I would love to use that, because then you just always have your target stick on you, and you can also just carry it to have a clicker that's a little bit more convenient than, around your wrist, because I could imagine riding with one around my wrist unless it was in my hand the whole time. I hate those. I don't even like training on the ground with those, because I have to catch it, and so I like the finger one much better, but that's all personal preference, and you can either use a real clicker or make the sound that clicker trainers love for some reason, but I hate that sound.
I like my whistle. I think it's fun and it's easy, and yeah.
I actually think I had a dream last night that I whistled to Lily and she came to me, which is...
Oh my God.
But when you said your whistle, I was like, oh, flashback. So there you go, thinking about the podcast. But yeah, so in short, yes, you can ride with a clicker. So number 4, do you think it's possible to completely restart horses like off-the-track thoroughbreds and quarter horses with positive reinforcement? And I think number 5 also is pretty much the same. Is it possible to completely restart a horse with plus R versus join up? So what do you think?
I have a lot of opinions on that.
I do too. I mean, first of all, yes, you can completely restart any horse regardless of breed. They all learn the same way. I mean, obviously, thoroughbreds and Arabs might be the more hot-blooded breeds, and then quarter horses are, cold-blooded. They're more chill, generally, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's still the principles of learning. They're all going to learn the same way. Dogs being predators, horses being prey animals, same thing. They learn the same exact way. They have different drives, but they learn the same way. It doesn't negate the principles of learning. Neither does breed.
Well, but even then, with that being said, that regardless of the breed, yes, plus R is possible and it's fantastic. Combining those questions, like you said, the first one is, do you think it's possible to restart horses like this and this breed? And then number 5, do you think it's possible to restart a horse with plus R versus join up? And the person with the question specifically follows it with, the horse in question is an 8-year-old OTTB that I'm looking into as my first project and possibly first event horse. So with that being said, that breed does not matter. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, okay, that's a whole other thing, but breed does not matter overall. Let's consider training, that OTTBs are already trained. They have already had a career. Mm-hmm. That is completely different. Retraining a racehorse is completely different than starting a Mustang.
Right.
Both are completely possible with plus R. That's end of story. It's possible. Right. But it's so different. With OTTBs, if you're looking into this as your first project horse and your first event horse, you need to be so good at plus R at this point, because an OTTB is a dangerous project, and it's not just starting it, it's that the horse already knows a lot and you have to reshape every single behavior. It's not just that you're starting a behavior, you are reshaping it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, really any project poses a danger, especially I think a new horse poses a danger, period, just because you don't have the ability to really predict them with any accuracy. But, obviously thoroughbreds that have gone to racing have the training that they're meant to go forward fast only. But I will say that in my experience, all of the off the tracks that I've started, I've never had one bolt with me. And I don't know if it's just because we're in a completely different environment and they're like, this doesn't look like where I'm supposed to gallop. But they usually are not as nutso as people think. And I don't think you were implying that, but I'm saying it for the benefit of the question. I think it is a big undertaking, and it depends on your expertise in riding and working with horses. I mean, I think I started my first OTTB at like 14. And so, I mean, like, it wasn't a big deal, but I definitely did not set that horse up for the most success I could have. And I think that goes into just educating yourself and really making sure that you have a solid understanding of the principles, and it would be best if you had somebody to turn to, a positive reinforcement professional that could help you, go through those steps and be successful, just so that you weren't like, starting something and then creating a problem and being like, oh, this sucks, I'm just going to go back to doing what I was doing. But also to tackle the join up component of that, join up and positive reinforcement are not the same thing one single bit at all. And episode 35, I think, of season 2 is my discussion on join up. Join up is strictly negative reinforcement. And I mean, that's not like to say negative reinforcement is horrid or anything like that, but it's not positive reinforcement at all. And the reason the horse responds is because of pressure and release, not because of bond or treats. So I would say you can restart a horse with positive reinforcement, but to compare it to join up is interesting. I'm not really sure where that comes from, but obviously join up doesn't have all the components you would need to restart or start a horse, but positive reinforcement does.
It's because join up's a tactic. Like, to simply put it, plus R is a method, and like methodology and training, join up is just simply a short tactic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And join up really is, I'm really not sure what the point is. I mean, I guess to have the horse follow you and respect you, but really you're just creating a fear response, in my opinion. But that whole episode is like 2 hours long, and we don't have time for that. So do you have any thoughts on this question?
No, I think we pretty much covered both those questions.
Sick. Look at us. We are burning through these, my dude. Okay. Number 6. What if there are no positive reinforcement riding instructors near me?
I think we did answer that in one of the last episodes, that especially in 2020 and COVID times, so many online classes have started and are really easily accessible across many, many different trainers. So that is your resource.
Yeah, I have a page on jetequitheory.com, and if you go under the positive reinforcement tab, I have the online courses, online communities tabs that you can join and become a part of. And I know it's not necessarily the most ideal. A lot of us do a lot better having somebody in person. And I mean, I think if you just really absolutely think that you cannot learn how to ride, via online, because I mean, it is tricky when you're first starting out. If you don't have any of the muscle memory or biomechanics already installed into your body on how to ride, having an online trainer and trying to ride with positive reinforcement is it's going to be harder. So I think that if you can handle it and you want to go to a riding school, I would vet a few of them, and when you go in to talk to them, be like, look, I'm interested in positive reinforcement. It's cool if you don't do that all the way, but I just want to tell you I am not cool with whipping or spurring or whatever the things are that you have set as boundaries. But the things that don't make you comfortable, you're not comfortable with pushing a horse or increasing pressure, whatever your scope of comfort is. I think you could absolutely go to a traditional riding school and start your career that way, learn positive reinforcement on the side, so that when you do have, say your own horse or a lease horse or something, that you can proceed to, training them with positive reinforcement without, having that extra added challenge of trying to figure out how you work your body on top of a horse as well.
Yeah. Well, even then, like you said, even if telling a riding instructor that, these are my boundaries, even if that makes you uncomfortable, kind of pointing this towards more socially anxious people. It's still like what I do, like go ride with traditional people and learn why things happen, how they happen, and what you should be doing as far as your position is and your riding goes. And then continue your plus R research on your own, and then just apply one to the other. That, okay, you understand how it works for traditional, then how would it work for plus R? How can you get a similar response from your horse, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree, and I think it's a really good brain teaser, because as a positive reinforcement trainer, you have to be able to think critically and analyze problems like that and kind of do like a reverse put together. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I know it's difficult when the circumstances aren't perfect, but I mean, if you are uncomfortable, it might give you a slight peace of mind. That I've had several people ask that question and had great success with laying out where they're comfortable before they start riding with somebody. So you already have that baseline set, and you have those rules established with this person going into your professional relationship. So you're not like in the middle of training and they're like, you've whipped him before, what's the problem, you know? And that's not to say that everybody that's already got a trainer and then has changed their opinions can't say anything. You know, but it's all up to you. And if you're just not comfortable, then, you know, just keep looking around until you find somebody, and then just be like, I really prefer a kinder approach. You know, I'm not interested in doing X, Y, and Z. And,
well, yeah, it is up to you. Like, if you can't find a trainer that you at least agree with holistically, then keep searching for one. It's up to you. And if you want to find any excuse you can to not have a plus R trainer, then, you know, that's also on you. Like, you have to pursue it. And if you don't pursue it, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it is. And I will say it's really difficult. And I've taken several, like, hiatuses from it, because it can be really difficult and overwhelming when you first get started and you're like, oh my God, I have to do all of this by myself. But that's why those online communities and online courses are there. There have been so many that have cropped up since COVID started, just, you know, trying to get the word out. And usually plus R trainers are super, super willing to help, because they want more people to be able to do it. They want to help horses. And, you know, again, I feel like I have to give a fucking caveat every time I speak, but it's not to discredit any traditional riders. There are many fantastic traditional trainers that use negative reinforcement primarily and are super kind to their animals. But the majority tends to not be the best in terms of ethicality. It tends to be more about the people, and there's a lot of pressure on trainers to have kids move up the levels and be more progressive, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's under a lot of pressure, but at the end of the day, you are paying them to train you, and if you don't like their training, you don't have to pay them, and you can have a conversation about the services you want to receive. And if you're not comfortable whipping a horse, don't pay for it, you know? Like, and also this is not that conversation on, like, our whips ethical. I plan on doing an episode on that soon, but I'm just saying, like, when people want to switch, that's usually kind of a thing you don't want to do anymore. But it is an example. Sorry, 8,000 caveats as always. So are we good on that question, you think?
I think we are, yeah.
All right, you want to take number 7?
Number 7 is competition at those high levels possible. Do I want to take that question? Yes, I do, because it is possible. You know, just because probably a lot of people, or the majority of people, have not seen it doesn't mean it's not possible. Also, you know, we tend to just have a window through Instagram, or even just a window through the only the people that we follow. And there's a lot of corners of the world that do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different styles of positive reinforcement. And at the very least, like Jill said, there are traditional trainers out there who do a phenomenal job, love their horses, really take into account how happy their horses are and how willing their horses are. So yes, it is possible. It's, you know, getting to any high level in general definitely costs a lot of money, and I think that's why the majority have not seen it be possible, because money isn't really developed through plus R currently.
No, that isn't actually a really good point that I hadn't considered. Like, fiscally, it's not popular, and you don't get clients, you don't get sponsors, and then, I mean, it's not an excuse, but it is, I think, a valid justification. And, I mean, also, like, it takes a really long time, and a lot of the people that sponsor top riders they get on a syndicate and they sponsor the horse and they want to see it move up to a certain level in a certain amount of time so they can sell it for more money. And like there's a lot of politics and finances that go into upper level riding. But
it's just right back to how the equestrian world doesn't even care about the horses. It caters around human beings.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's a lot of truth to that, because I mean, it's just like, any other animal, like cats. They're not meant to be fed in square pelleted meals, and yet we do it because it's convenient for us. That doesn't mean it's inherently wrong or the worst thing ever, but it is important to recognize that that is not natural for them, and we're doing it for us. You can still do it, but I think it's important to recognize, why it's happening and not deny that. But I do know.
Sorry, I just cut you off.
No, you're good. I was just going to say that Georgia Bruce, who does Click with Horses, I think she's based out of Australia. She's a para-dressage rider, and she rides at fairly high levels, if I'm not totally mistaken. But I absolutely love her. She has a TED Talk all about it, and she's just brilliant. Her name is Georgia Bruce, and Click with Horses literally everywhere on social media. And she does a lot of dressage riding. She does trick training and just pretty much every facet of being a horse trainer, equestrian. Like, she does it all, and it's beautiful and just so compassionate. And she does do competitions and upper level stuff, so I think she's one to look to. I know of many other trainers, but I don't know their credentials, and I don't want to misspeak. So, but yeah, so I think it's absolutely possible, but I think you also have to kind of add in the difficulty. Is it worth it to the horse to go run a cross-country course for 14 minutes jumping 4-foot tables that are 5-6 feet across, and like for that amount of time and what it takes to get to that point? Are those horses going to do it for positive reinforcement, or are they going to do it to avoid, an increase of pressure? That is questionable. If the horse has the choice to say no, would they? And that's where I think traditional training gets really blurry and fuzzy, and where we start catering to people is because, the horse never really gets an opportunity to say no, because if you put your leg on and ask the horse to go forward and the horse doesn't move and you take it off instead of escalating pressure, you are reinforcing that behavior. And so in order to get negative reinforcement to work, the horse has to move forward. There are other ways around that with negative reinforcement, but this is a basic example. But if you put your leg on and the horse doesn't move forward, you tend to apply more pressure, or kick until the horse moves forward, and then you stop. So in training, the horse doesn't really have the option to say no unless it's, kind of yelling. And by yelling, I mean like the bad behaviors of bucking, rearing, and things like that. But so it's really difficult to say if the horses love their job or not unless you remove that threat and see what would happen. So I can't guarantee for sure.
And even with my experience with horses loving their job, like I have a group of purely plus our trained horses now, and when they really enjoy what they're doing, it's typically in short bursts, and it's those bursts don't really reach, like what you see in competition where we're going all the way around a 12 jump course or you're going through an entire dressage test. Yes, I think it's possible to reach that. But it's still like once they've kind of had their fill of enjoyment, they typically want to move on to something else that has more or the same level of enjoyment but is different, or they just want to stop,
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty much all I have to say on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about short bursts is really important, because if you think about where horses have come from in the wild, they're used to running for short bursts. Even race horses, the thoroughbreds that are bred for it, they don't really run for more than a couple minutes. And so they're not designed to be running for forever and having 30-minute conditioning sets and things like that. Yes, they'll do it and you can get them there, but if it were up to them, they probably canter around their paddock for 30 seconds and then go back to walking and grazing. And, on a particularly brisk morning, it might be a little bit more. But I think they do tend to prefer some dynamic changes. I got real stuck on that word.
I'm just going to let you use that word.
Yep, we'll go with it. We're just going to glide over it. But I think they tend to prefer some changes, like it not staying the same thing over and over again, like running straight, jumping. And don't get me wrong, cross country is very, very close to my heart, and I miss it dearly. But I mean, I'm not going to do it just for me anymore. And if I get a horse that is okay with doing that and can have the option to say no and will do it willingly, then hell yeah, let's fucking go, dude. But but other than that, I'm just not interested in doing it just for me anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we move into our ridden issues. These are specifically about like being in the saddle, and the other ones are dancing around that. So, number 8 is, do you have any tips on how to incorporate positive reinforcement into flat work? Do you have any at all? Any at all?
Yeah, I do. It even starts like lunging. I'll sometimes with my not plus R horses, if I'm lunging them, I'll incorporate a few treats. But even then, like, you know, lunging obviously is in short bursts because there's a lot of times when the horse is you're asking the horse to stop, or the horse has to come into you, especially if you're changing direction, yada, yada. So you do have to be careful with that. Like, you know, you get what you reward. If you're only rewarding the horse when he's stopped and with you, then he's going to want to keep turning and stopping with you.
Right.
So I do treat conservatively when I'm lunging. For riding, it's similar. You know, back to I train and the horses I train, I work mostly with hotter horses. So if I am going to use treats with my not plus R horses, then it's probably for more relaxed things. Typically like a long and low walk, if they can maintain that and just kind of carry onwards. They get treats for that. We might sometimes, like if I'm starting to teach the horse the side pass, then again, really short bursts, and he might get a little more treats for more controlled, delicate movements like that, where I really have to focus on each individual footfall. Transitions, you can reward transitions. However, it can really quickly tie into, okay, the horse does the transition, but then he only sustains the next gait for the next 1 to 3 strides, and then he stops. Or like what I tend to see is people reward the transition so well, but then like, for example, a walk to canter or a trot to canter, the horse doesn't actually develop a good canter. It develops kind of a jumping, leaping canter, which can turn out to be not rhythmic and not controlled. And very plainly put, it's not a canter, it's something else.
You got a little seahorse. Yeah, and I think that all of those things can be mitigated. I mean, a lot of, like, if you're interested in listening to, like, collection and how to progress through riding, I know Shauna Karish has a lot of really awesome episodes on her podcast that is, I think, Clicker Training Horses 101. I always forget the name of that podcast because every clicker trainer ever has a very similar title and it confuses me. But she has a lot of episodes on like how to work past the transitions so that you don't get those water horse vibes.
Yeah.
And I think with lunging too, a big thing would be that, you know, when the horse does stop and come into you because you're asking for a change of directions, you can obviously reinforce that, but you want to be clear with your other cues that the horse, when you're asking it to stay on the circle, just like any behavior, you know, if you're working out in the pasture and you have your horse targeting, you don't want them offering a hip target, for instance. The same thing applies to lunging. If they turn into you and come up to you, that might not be the behavior you're asking for. I think you should analyze it and think, why is the horse doing this? But if you can provide a cue for the trot, you know, a keep going signal, and have them stay out on the circle and then click. And I would say, unless you're changing directions or want them to come to you, then you would click and have it established as a rule with them that they stay there and you go to them to give them the treat, so that they're not always coming to you and you have to keep sending them back out on the circle. So you would click, approach the horse, give them the treat, retreat, and then cue them to continue on. And but yeah, I think that those are some good ways to incorporate it into flat work. You know, I think that you have to be strategic about it. I would not say to just go get on your horse with treats and start reinforcing willy-nilly, because you will end up with a horse that comes in some of the later questions that has an issue with doing anything because they're like, wait, whoa, you have food? What are the, like, there are no rules and they don't understand how they can get it. So they're just like, wait, no, I'm going to do it, the only thing that I know, which is to hunt for it. Where is it? Get me the snacks. So,
I mean, if I have any actual advice on that question, typically with my not plus R horses, I do try not to use food while I'm riding. I do, kind of tying into one of our earlier questions, like I do use food around riding because it develops the relationship between you and the horse, not necessarily between the horse and the work. Because at the very least, he does enjoy me and it builds trust between him and me. But even then, it depends on my actions moving forward on whether or not he feels that I'm something worth responding to. But for riding, like I'll use Luke as an example because, even though Luke is kind of like become one of my horses, and of course I use treats around him all the time, I do still avoid riding with him with treats. Like I'll take a treat bag out on trail, especially, trail is a lot easier to use treats with. But I'll take treats out on trail, especially if he's going to be worried about something he isn't typically, but, just in case. Or like if we're just walking around for the day, he bangs his legs on things. Sometimes he just needs to be tack walked for a day. Then making, if he offers a really nice big walk, making it enjoyable, giving a treat for that. But otherwise, like one of the other horses, Cody, when I give him a few treats throughout a lesson, he gets really, like, just the treat builds up in his mouth because he's carrying a bit, and he gets really frustrated about that, and he will literally stop mid-canter to wipe his nose on his knees, and that's, but it's dangerous. It's, he hasn't thrown his rider yet, but it does catch her off guard. So I, do draw the line somewhere. Do be careful with it. Be careful about the timing with it. Again, I use it mostly with the really hot horses. If I really need help training and emphasizing and shaping slower and relaxed behaviors, other than that, it could even be, horses who are typically ridden traditionally aren't used to the sound of treats in a bag on your on your belt dangling around, and that could actually set them off. So even that, it's something you have to get them used to.
I feel like it's just like anything else. I mean, you need to do your due diligence and have a plan about it, and not just willy-nilly when you're riding, oh, that was a good canter transition, and your horse is like, hey, I have no idea what that sound means, or they're like, I've heard that on the ground, I'll stop, and then they're just stuck in that mindset of like, I need to get the food, I don't want to keep working because I want the food. And so you have to make, like our previous episodes where we've talked about how to introduce a horse to being ridden under saddle with positive reinforcement, that's where I would go for answers to this question on like how to build up to that. The past couple of episodes, I don't remember their numbers, but all the Caine series. And so those would be the ways that I would tackle it. But I would say if you're not really interested in doing positive reinforcement, it might just be best for your human frustration to not, unless you're going to do it strategically. And it pains me to say that, but I don't want a bunch of people out there riding and clicking and having horses that are spinning in circles because they're like, where's my food? And, or stopping to rub their nose. And, that might be one of those things. I don't know you and your student in that situation, but, like with Nova, you have to use a different bridle setup. And so, that might be something to consider out there if you find that your horse is having a problem with chewing in the bit. I have not run into that thus far, but it's obviously Caine has. Like it's a thing that can happen. So maybe you go about changing your equipment so that you either have a hackamore or a bozal or work on bridleless or something like that. So you can work around that. But I think that if you're worried about having a bunch of issues, it's not to say that you shouldn't ever ride with positive reinforcement, but maybe if you don't feel like you're at a place where you could have a plan when you go out to get on your horse, then maybe just stick with what you've got. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keep doing what you're doing. Read up some on how to ride with negative reinforcement without escalating pressure. Work on changing those things while on the side you're learning about how to read or how to train with positive reinforcement under saddle. And then once you feel more confident, then you can start introducing it. But I wouldn't just like read one book on how to do groundwork with positive reinforcement and then go apply it to riding. You need to do research, and that doesn't mean you can't touch your horse in the meantime. You can keep doing what you're doing and research, but don't rush it, because that's where you end up with the problems. When there are holes in your own training, then you might create them in your horse's, or likely will create them in your horse's training. So, yeah. Alrighty, so number 9 is, how do I stop my horse from pulling on the reins?
That's a weird question, I'll be honest. There's a lot of different things that could imply, and it's generally a vague question, so I'm just going to assume like a couple different things. One is, I know a lot of horses who really enjoy stretching, especially at the walk or the trot, and so they'll try to pull the reins out of the rider's hands to initiate that. If you're looking at that from a traditional aspect, it means that your fingers are not closed around your rein, and that you probably really typically ride with looser fingers than you should, which basically means you are not maintaining the connection that you should, because connection runs from, if you're riding in a bit, it runs from the bit through your closed fingers to your elbow. It should not end at your hands, because that's where a lot of times you'll find that you ride with loose fingers or you let go of your hands. The second thing that I'm going to assume is, from a plus R perspective, that it might be similar, that your horse tries to either alleviate pressure or get the rider to let them stretch down, or like if you're riding through grass that your horse wants to graze, which that of course could even mean other things. But in general, when I'm teaching my horses to ride, especially when I'm teaching horses to start accepting contact, or to at the very least shape headset, I very much do exactly that, is I shape the headset that the horse can comfortably maintain that still benefits the body. So if I am teaching the low stretching headset, then there's a signal that goes into it. If it's not a verbal signal, it's at least a physical signal, and the horse obliges, and the horse is rewarded for not just doing it, but for maintaining it. And if I don't want that headset, then I've also shaped and rewarded the other headset. Maybe he's a little more collected, or his nose is at least on the vertical, or he's, even then, if that's going to happen, it means the horse has to be carrying through with his body. When I say headset, I never teach the horse specifically what to do with their head, right? It has to be influenced by what is happening in the engine and in the body. And I think maybe that's the best way to end my answer to this question is, riders really focus on what they see in front of them. Like I said, it goes right back into the hands, that the hands will release prematurely. With it being that easy to focus on what you see in front of you, you really have to feel what's happening underneath behind you, because whatever you see is just a reflection of what's happening underneath and behind.
Right. I completely agree with that, 100%. I do have one more possible scenario that I used to experience a lot with a horse that's pulling on your reins. The way I interpreted that was like sort of a rooting behavior, like jerking the reins out of your head out of your hand by pushing their nose out and forward. And what I always experienced with this, because I had a really bad habit of locking through my shoulder and elbow, and so when I was riding around, I have the horse's head stuck in this one position. So if you watch a horse walk, their head swings from side to side. In the trot, it's fairly stable, but there is some variation in movement, so there does need to be a level of softness in your hand. You need to be connected, but there is a level of softness to allow for their natural movement, so that they have their head and neck. And then there's also, in canter, their head moves. It's forward and back. Oh my God. It's been
up and down, forward and back.
Yeah, it's been a hot second since I've ridden, apparently. But when you lock like that and the horse is moving, say in the canter, they're moving forward and back in kind of like a circle motion, then every time they move to go forward and you're staying in a static position, then the horse is hitting that bit. And so if you're tense and holding them there, they're going to, at some point, be like, all right, dude, let go of my face. And that's where you get the rooting behavior. And I used to have that all the time. And it's a problem with not being stable in your lower leg. Because if you're depending on your hand for your balance, which is usually what causes that rigidity through your arms, is because you're not stable in your lower leg and your core. And then once you get that, and then there are various exercises that you can do for that. But once you get that, then you're able to allow your arms to be more elastic and stay with the horse rather than trying to hold them somewhere. And a lot of that also comes from, like, if you're riding around and you feel like you have to hold onto your horse, it's because they're not balancing themselves and they're likely on their forehand, or like with Zoe, she used to be really forward. And it's because she was never taught how to carry herself. She depended on me to hang on to her where she was. And I say she depended on me, but it was me depending on her, depending on me, because I didn't teach her how to carry herself in the way that I wanted her to. I just always held her there. So then she needed that. And then you get this problem of head flipping or leaning into your bit where you constantly have to hang on to your horse. You're working too hard. You should never have to hold on to your horse's face to get them to stay at the tempo you want. And that comes from not having a balanced horse or doing something for too long. Like Caine said, you shape the headset by working with the horse and using their body in a way that is compassionate to them, because it's the same thing that we've talked about before. Like, you don't go on a 10-mile jog with a 50-pound backpack on. So especially if you have a green horse or a horse that's changing disciplines or one that doesn't really have a developed top line or hind end, then when you go to do this, you can't expect them to trot around for your whole ride, 20-30 minute ride in a frame. You have to allow them to change and take breaks and build up that muscle. And it's not the horse being rude, but sometimes they're just like, I can't hold this anymore, let go, it hurts, like my muscles are cramping. And I think also a lot of it comes from what Caine said with the headset. Like, instead of using the whole horse's body and having the headset come as a symptom of the body being in the correct position, it's, can I get his nose down, and who cares about what's happening behind me, Yeah. Okay. Are we good on that one?
I think we are, yeah.
Okay, cool. So number 10 is, what should I do if my horse doesn't listen to my signals and fights me on everything? So I have some thoughts on this one.
I have a few, but I'm going to keep it just so short. It's very simply, your signals are probably not clear.
Yep.
And I'm going to say it right now. Your horse does not want to fight with you.
Nope.
If you feel like you're fighting with your horse, it's 100% that you are fighting with your horse.
Yes. And I, even when I rode traditionally, I used to always say, like, it is never the horse's fault, because they would not be in the situation voluntarily without me. So regardless of what they're doing, it is my bad. If something is going wrong, I'm not being clear enough, or I'm not making it worth it to them enough, or what have you. It's my bad, and I need to do something to fix it. And so, if your horse, oh God, it used to make me so angry to hear people in my lessons, back when I was riding regularly, it was like, they would be like, he just won't listen to me. He's not listening. He's blowing me off. He's ignoring me. And I hear trainers say, like, he's just blowing you off. He is doing his own thing. He's taking control. None of those things are true. The horse is not just ignoring you and not listening to you. And if the horse is, like, in the case of a positive reinforcement example, say I ask Zoe for a hip target and she doesn't give it. She knows that target. I know she does. She knows the cue. She knows everything. If she's not doing it, immediately I'm like, what's wrong? Why is she not wanting to offer that? Is something out? Does she need to see a chiropractor, body worker, blah, blah, blah. And, it's not like a neurosis, but she has ample reason to do that behavior. She knows it and she loves the reinforcement, and that's one of her favorite behaviors. So why is she not doing it? But, when you have a horse that's not listening and you're like, he knows this and he's just blowing me off, it's one of the three things that I always talk about. It's either pain, confusion, or fear. And usually with traditional training, confusion is a big thing, especially with amateur riders. And I experience this a lot in my training, that you think you've installed a button, but you got halfway there and then just expected it to keep working. And eventually, when it's not...
I like how you put that.
Yeah, and once once you've installed it partially and it works a little bit, if it doesn't have all of the components to keep that button working, then it's going to fall apart and stop working. And so if you're riding and you ask the horse for an inside bend or a canter transition and you're like, he knows his leads, why isn't he picking up his lead? I would immediately be like, either there's a pain issue going on in his back, his hind end, his stifles, something, or that, my cue is not clear enough. He doesn't understand what I'm asking. He's just gotten it right on accident a few times. And so I think that's where you refine your training. And again, like we said earlier with the creating an adversarial relationship with your horse, the language, like, why is my horse fighting me on everything? He's not fighting you. Like, there's no fight here. Riding is for fun because we enjoy it and we love horses and we want to make them enjoy the process too. If you think your horse is fighting you, you really need to reevaluate the training because it's not fun for either of you. Something's gone wrong and you need to figure out what is causing that fight. And usually it's pain or confusion. And fear is... that might not apply to the circumstance, but it could. But I would say, check his saddle, check his bridle, check his teeth, check his feet, have a body worker and a chiropractor out, and then work on, like, does he respond to the cues when I ask correctly, or do I need to go back and fill in some holes? In one of the older episodes we talked about when you build a house, you don't just throw a rock and build it in that place. You have to check the foundation, check the ground, and start building up from there. Otherwise, it's all going to collapse. And riding works the same way, and then you end up thinking that your horse is just blowing you off and being a dick when it's not what's happening. The horse just doesn't know usually, or is like, I physically can't.
Well, there's only one thing we missed on that question, and I just thought of it.
Okay.
It goes back into the clarity of your question, or the clarity of, like, when you ask, like, are your signals clear? Does he know what you're asking? I talk about this to a lot of my students, that you have to also ask with fairness, and the fairness goes a lot into the timing and just simply how you set your horse up.
Right.
For example, like with Plus R, if you're doing groundwork, like for Nova, if I wanted to ask him to side pass, or say that he did side pass, we went to the side, I rewarded, he is chewing his treat, and I already asked him to side pass again. He's going to give one of two answers. One, he might be like, oh my God, you're asking again. Okay, wait, I'm going. And then he frantically goes into it, and it's not as good as the first one that he did, or the second answer that he's going to do is he's just not even going to respond to it because he's not ready. He's still chewing. He's still processing what we just did. And by me asking him too quickly, he's just not set up for it. So for your example, if the horse is not picking up the correct canter lead, then not only should you be asking with a clear signal that the horse understands,
right,
but you need to consider your timing and then how your horse is set up for it. It's even as simply as the leg that the horse takes off on, or even where you're asking in the arena. Some horses have an easier time asking in the corner of a turn, especially greener horses. So that's another thing to consider, is just how fair are you making the question for him to easily answer.
Right, and having a horse, especially a green horse, I've used the corner thing so much. When you have them in the corner, they're stepping up under themselves with their hind end and their inside hind leg, and they're already set up to pick up the right lead because they're on the turn as well, versus if you're just in the middle of nowhere in the center of your arena and you kick for canter, I mean, you're probably not going to get the lead. Another thing that is a really common problem is people lean. They don't have a clear back outside leg or an inside leg at the girth to ask for canter. And I mean, you could have any number of cues. I mean, you could tap your horse on the withers and have him canter depending on how you train it. But you need to make sure that you have a clear cue, and your canter cue cannot just be both legs pushing into the sides. You need to have a specific, I want this lead cue, so it's clear for the horse, and you need to make sure that your body's not interfering, like Caine said, both directionally, and if you're leaning, a lot of people like to lean the direction that they're trying to pick up the lead, but if you're trying to pick up your right lead and you lean right, you're putting all your weight on the horse's right side and they're going to pop the left, especially green horses. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's never that the horse is deliberately trying to fight you or be obstinate. Most of the time they want to get the right answer so that they don't have to face some consequences that come from specific riders. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for that question.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 11 is I've done and tried so many things with my mare, but she still won't round her back or lift her withers. Tips, thoughts. My first thought, of course, is kissing spine. And
Your
saddle
first thought
fit.
is what?
Kissing spine.
Oh.
I mean, it's
That's one.
Yeah. Well, my first thought, obviously, is like, is it a pain issue? Does the horse have kissing spine? Or does it have just a sore back? Does your saddle fit? And, how are the horse's hips? It's sacroiliac. A lot of horses get out there. And then I know Caine is going to talk about the biomechanics, so I'll let you take over that one.
Oh, you know me so well. I'm just going to jump right into the biomechanics. And that goes right into, do you know what it means to round the back and lift the withers? The way that this question is phrased makes me think that this is something that this person hears a lot from their trainer. Mm-hmm. And it also means that, okay, you've tried so many things, you likely haven't tried all the things. And especially if this is something that you're hearing from your trainer, then I need to tell you that your trainer is trying to train you and it still hasn't happened yet. Then you're likely not at a spot where you're capable of making it happen, however horrible that might sound. Or if your horse doesn't know this, then your trainer is trying to get you both to understand this at the same time, and that's going to take even longer. And that's where you really have to listen to your trainer and work with your trainer on something like that, or even just have your trainer do it. Now, as far as rounding the back and lifting the withers, again, you have to understand what exactly is happening there and what it takes to do that. When this person says they've tried so many things, there's things that I can imagine they've tried. There's things that I can think of that maybe they haven't tried, or maybe things that they have I can't think of, yada yada. But my advice, I suppose, is, have you done transitions? Can you get that feel and that outcome of the quote-unquote rounding the back and lifting the withers at the walk, from a transition from walk to trot? Can you do it at the trot? Because if you're only thinking about this at the canter, then are you actually getting it somewhere else? Mm-hmm. Again, are you actually understanding it? Because you don't want to just focus on rounding the back and lifting the withers. Again, it goes right back into, we focus on what we can see. Riders with a good feel can focus on what they feel, but then it is much harder to feel what's happening way in the hind end. So just thinking about stuff like that, like, do you actually comprehend the question as a whole? Because if you do, or if you at least strive to and seek to understand it as a whole, then you're going to have a lot more success with actually getting it to happen, rather than trying thing after thing and still be met with failure.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree, and I relate a lot, actually, because I remember, and I've said it a few times on the podcast, that when I was riding traditionally, it wasn't until I started training with positive reinforcement that I understood why inside leg to outside rein actually works. And it's because I started looking into biomechanics and reinforcement, and I realized that when I put on my inside leg and took hold of my outside rein and Zoe dropped her head, both of those things released, and then she would carry there. And so, but then I didn't understand why those two things worked. And my trainer was like, well, I mean, whatever, it doesn't, like, you're fine. And I was like, but
it works. Like, yeah. You see it. Why question it?
Right. But that I think that plays directly into lifting her back and coming up through her withers. Because when you put on your inside leg, you're theoretically, if it's done right, you're creating an inside bend, and then the horse's their abdomen has to lift, and then when you combine it with the outside rein, the head must go down, and then when you soften, the horse is in that position where they have a lifted back. And then obviously comes in some half halts, some rebalancing onto the hind end, and having the horse continue to hold themselves. But I think a really, like, where I would start personally with a horse that's having a problem lifting their back is lots and 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 lots of long and low work. Because likely a horse that will not do it doesn't have the muscle to do it. And, some horses might look like it, but I would be willing to say that this horse might not have a super developed top line. And if she does, another thing that could be a possibility is tension. And if she's worried or nervous or anxious, like Zoe was, Zoe could look like she was coming up through her back and her withers, but really you could bounce a quarter off her back because she was so tight, and she would never soften. So that's what long and low work does. And if you don't feel like you can let go of her face and keep the pace the same, I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. But if you don't feel like you can let go of her pace or her face and keep the pace, then that's probably your issue. The horse isn't understanding how to stay regulated, and it's probably leaning on the bit and depending on your hand for that regulation. And then if that is still a problem, you're not going to get the lift. And so you have to think, how can I rebalance her? How can I stay out of her way? How can I stay soft in my arms? Because if you're rigid anywhere in your body, your horse is going to reflect that. And if you're tight in your arms, the horse is going to be tight all across their back, and then you have no shot at getting that lifted relaxation. So I would do a lot of long and low on some circles. Really, I would start on the ground, because that's what I'm doing with Zoe, is training that long and low on the ground, building that top line. So, because I think that's more fair, personally. I think it's a lot easier to help them build that top line from the ground while they're not carrying a rider than it is to try and do it all at once. We go back to the backpack and running example, it's a lot easier to build up your strength first. You risk not hurting yourself or getting frustrated. And, I think that makes more sense. But I would say...
Well, you only missed like a simple thing with the biomechanics too. Like you start at the abdomen and move forward. Even then, it's the propulsion from the hind legs and getting the inside hind up and underneath them, and the rhythm from there that then goes into the abdomen and then goes into the back and then goes over the withers and through the crest of the neck. It starts,
and then it all circles back around.
Smaller.
Yeah, it's all connected, and you have to understand that. And it's not complicated to understand, but if you've never had it explained to you before, how could you understand it and let alone be successful at riding it? Some people just have that feel, and I hate those people with my life. Caine, I'm looking at you. But but other people, we actually have to learn it and then try to apply it. And I'm not saying that you don't learn it. I know you do, but it happens so well for you.
To make it easier for, quote, you people who don't have the feel for it, then it's exactly what you said, that you need to work on long and low work. But even then, it goes deeper than that. So to say just the most that I want to say about it, a horse stretching down and having a rhythmic stretching engaged trot, because it's not just lowering the head, there's a lot of other tiers that go to it.
You can do that and be inverted, and
you
that's
can only
equally
have
bad.
That stretch if you have a relaxed horse, like you said. So that's your base, is rhythm and relaxation, and then you can go to stretching, and then you have to go to engagement, and you have to go to the impulsion of the hind legs, and you have to move over the back. And that's why I really prefer transitions for it too. And also, like you said, the long and low. Like there's all these things you have to stack to it. So if your mare is not rounding her back and lifting her withers, you've really missed a really important foundation into building up to that.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely, if all pain has been ruled out, then that's the route I would go. Lots of transitions, long and low, and developing your rhythm, because if those things aren't happening, how could you expect to have a quality gait? But usually, in my experience, horses that do not want to lift and use their back are doing it for a reason, especially if you've tried endless different things. And if all of this sounds very familiar to you, then that's when I would really start checking the back and the saddle, because saddle fit is so important. And if it's impeding your horse in any way, she can't. And no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to train through the pain. You will not be able to get her to do what you want, nor should you want her to do what you want if she's in pain, and that's what I experienced with Zoe. I never really got that true lift in her back, because she could pose, but she was still wildly inverted, and her hind end's running out behind her. And when she did engage, I got a tight hind end that was very springy with a swishy tail. And when we started looking further, we realized she had some hock problems, and she had back pain. And kissing spine, a lot of horses have kissing spine and they don't have any symptoms. A lot of horses can have it and not have pain. But A lot of horses do have kissing spine and do have pain, and it's a very common issue, and there is a lot you can do to help those horses that don't require surgery and all the 9 yards. But it is a common thing, so I would definitely look into that as well, because you're not going to be able to get anywhere if your horse is in pain. That's the first step.
Yeah.
So...
Well, and the last tip I want for this question, because I really do want to help this rider, even though I feel like I've kind of somewhat roasted her, which I do apologize for that.
So blunt.
But,
it hurts me.
Assuming that all the steps have been taken and it really is just a struggle for you to round her back and lift her withers, again, assuming all those steps up to it, the pyramid of collection has mostly been fulfilled, at least up to this point. My last tip is connection. And for that, if you are riding with the bit and bridle, that would mean contact. If you're riding bitless or bridleless, then that just very much does mean connection. And I want to just kind of describe connection and contact in the same way that it's exactly that. Is if you can't maintain a connection through your horse, bitted or bitless, or bridleless, then you're not going to be able to maintain that impulsion from behind, because you do have to give them somewhere to go. If that muscle is going to come up over the top line, over the crest of their neck, you don't just want it to, shoot out downwards and then them throw their forehand. You do have to establish a connection there and make sure, right back again, I can't say this enough, close your fingers, ride with closed fingers. If you're holding even a neck rope, but, reins especially, keep the fingers closed and maintain your connection with your horse.
Yeah, that was a big issue I used to have riding too, because I would ride with really soft hands, but I was locked in my shoulder and elbow. So I was trying to give my horse some softness without fixing the issue. I was like, I don't want to have tight, rigid hands, but I was tight and rigid everywhere else. So when you close your fingers on the reins, then you can't hold. Otherwise, you're going to get that horse that's rooting and pulling against you. So when you close your fingers, it doesn't have to be a death grip, but like when you have a grip on the reins, and you soften through your shoulders down and back and soften your elbows and allow them to follow with the horse, less so in trot. But if your hands are moving all over the place and you're pulling back and depending on the horse's mouth for balance, they can't use their head and neck. Why should they? If they do, they're going to get bopped in the mouth every single time. So I would definitely have to agree with that. Close your fingers, but relax the rest of your arm, because if you close your fingers and you're still rigid, you're going to create other issues as well, because that's what I did with several horses.
Yeah.
Okay, so question number 12 is, how do you deal with a horse under saddle that gets herd bound and panics?
Yes, so the undersaddle is your giveaway about this question, because you should be working with this on the ground first. And if you can't have everything absolutely perfect on the ground, then you shouldn't yet be thinking about taking your horse out alone under saddle. And Jill calls me out on this a lot. I literally got a companion horse for my horse, so I cheated and skipped steps on this for my own horse.
Cheater.
But I also felt it wasn't necessary to get her over that, it was such a severe anxiety that I was like, okay, she has reasons for this. Probably even more reasons that I can't even understand or see, because I'm sure they developed before I started working with her. But regardless, work with it on the ground and understand, your horse has these anxieties for a reason. He's a herd-bound animal at his core.
Yes.
And the panicking, I addressed this kind of in one of the last podcasts, that when you reach a point that your horse is just straight up panicking and exploding, then you've trigger stacked to that point.
I'm so glad you said that, because the whole time when you started to say like under saddle's your first clue, I was like, it's trigger stacking. You like, if you don't address the issue on the ground, why on earth would it work under saddle as well? You've added another complicated element, and now you're on their backs trying to deal with this. And I think what you said, you hit the nail on the head with the ethogram. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to get a companion horse for their horse, but be a little bit compassionate. Like, if you're taking your horse out on a trail alone and they are terrified, wait until you have a buddy to go out on the trail with you. And
even then, it's like, what are you enjoying about having your horse melting down every single time you go out on a trail? Like, it's easily avoidable going out by yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can work up to it where, maybe you have your buddy trail a little bit behind you or something, and you slowly, over weeks, you slowly start creating that distance to where the horse is confident and okay, and you've built the relationship with you where they see, well, not, oh God, I don't want to get into all that, but like where you are a partner, you are a source of social interaction to the horse as well, and they're comfortable and confident with just you two. And some horses, they might not ever get to that point. Like Caine's horse, Lily, she had a huge history of emotional attachment severances and lost a bunch of buddies through one way or another. And, she's got a lot of trauma around it. So I think what you did is a lot of what I'm doing with Zoe and showing. Like, I could work on it and I could get her back to a level where she would be willing to show and be comfortable in all those environments, but I don't see the point. I'm like, if we could just not do it, if it's too much for her, it's so much anxiety. I'm wasting both of our times trying to work through that, and, I'm risking a lot doing it. So, and that's not to say that that's everyone's answer for that problem or this problem, but I think it's a judgment call of like, do you really want to work through that? And if you do, then it's just like everything else. It's successive approximation. Where I would not start is on the horse's back and just taking it away from its buddy, tacking up, grooming while they're calling to each other, and then, having to haul your horse out to the arena as they're planting their feet behind you, and then getting in the arena and they're screaming for their buddy and panicking, their eyes are popping out of their head and they're running around all over the place, and you're just trying to manage. You've blown past the whole thing. You're at a point where you can't work on anything when you've gone that far. The place I would start would be outside the fence. Like, you just take your horse out of the paddock and they can see each other over the fence. You work on getting comfortable with that. And then slowly you get a little bit further. And this might take weeks. It might take months. It depends on your horse and their history. And it depends on what you want to work on. And also, I completely second what Caine said. Like, what fun is it if you're like, well, I want to ride. Okay, well, if riding looks like taking your horse out to the arena and it's screaming and panicking the entire time, you're both probably not enjoying it. So I would say it sucks because it's frustrating that you want a horse that you can just ride, but your horse has problems, he has issues, and he needs you to help him through it. Sorry. People aren't perfect either. We all have our issues and fears too. And you can't really fault a herd animal, an animal that is so social at its core that its basic needs are food, water, shelter, and buddies. Like, you can't fault it for wanting to be with its buddies. It's frustrating as hell. I get it. But, either work with the horse on it or get a companion horse.
Yeah, some horses are just totally fine going out alone. Nova never cared, whether he had someone with him or not. That's just him. Lily has always cared, and that's her. Luke is kind of in between. Luke would prefer to have someone with him, but we are slowly building up going out alone, and that's just, taking it step by step, distance by distance. I didn't just take him all the way out to the trailhead. We kind of just walked to the end of the driveway to start, and we built up from there.
Yeah, and every horse is different. Like Zoe, if I were to take, when she was paddocked with Amber, if I took Amber out, she would lose her mind. But when I take Zoe out, Amber loses her mind. But when I have one of them, neither of them cares about the other screaming and hollering the whole time. So I try not to do that because it's very stressful, and now Amber has a buddy out there with her, so that doesn't happen.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but that's another way to mitigate it. If the horse in the paddock is screaming, leave a buddy with them so that they're not adding to the whole thing. And obviously, there's only so much you can control at a boarding barn or what have you. But,
well, that was it. You nailed it on the head, is that you see the separation anxiety mostly in horses who only have one other horse, and likely horses who are sold. Everyone's going to be fine.
Say that one more time. You cut out.
Oh, I said, you see it in stalls and you see it in horses with only one buddy. Put them in a pasture, everyone will be fine.
Yeah, and I think that is a good place to end that question. There's just so much that goes into separation anxiety, and I know Adele at the Willing Equine has done a lot of work on that and has some blog posts, and her foundation course also might offer some help on that as well if you need a little bit more. Hopefully we gave you some ideas to start thinking about what you can do to mitigate that. But yeah, I think we can go ahead and move on to question 13, which regards, it says jumping with positive reinforcement, question mark. I wrote these, so A+ to me. But it says, it's dangerous to click and have a sliding stop on the jump's backside. Her horse does a literal sliding stop when clicked at trot or canter. And I'm assuming at the same with jumps. So, the horse hears the click for reinforcement and then just plants his feet and skids to a stop and then is like, where's my food? Which I gotta say, I love the enthusiasm.
I know. That's actually what I think there's another question further on about a horse stopping for treats.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when we get to that. Otherwise, yes, I like enthusiasm because really, if you have a response from your horse, look and treat. Keep that, to say that as plainly as I can.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there are definitely some ways that you can mitigate because on one hand, like, enthusiasm or anxiety, which is it? And because, like, for Zoe, I know when I was riding her with positive reinforcement, it was kind of hit or miss whether she would stop when I clicked. And I think a lot of that is largely due to I went too fast when I got back on her because I was excited. But also because my sk doesn't pick up very well over crunchy sand. And then there's also that, she's got a long history of being ridden traditionally. She's not used to listening for the click when I'm on her back, so there's a bit of a learning curve there. And it got better the more I rode her, but obviously that got interrupted with her diagnosis. But I would say that if you're having that sliding stop reaction, that we should probably just back it up a couple steps and get it really relaxed and consistent at the walk before we jump into jumping. So I think you could definitely be successful in even rewarding the behavior for clicking and slowing to a stop,
We'll even go further than back. Like, go back to your groundwork, because I see riders, traditional and plus R, but especially traditional, who when they start introducing their horse to jumping, they are on the horse, trotting the horse over a cross rail, and that's how they introduce the horse to jumping. I really strongly disagree with that. Whenever I've taught a horse jumping, it's always been from the ground first. You never know if the horse is natural or not to jumping, if he's going to actually pick up his feet, or if he's literally going to fall on his face. But also just, in general, doing it without a rider so the horse can really figure it out himself. But then furthermore, we should know as jumping riders, because you and I are both jumping riders,
yes,
that it's not just about the jump. It's, the rhythm and the approach and the distance of takeoff and the appropriate landing and the continued rhythm after the jump. It's all important. So when you shape behaviors, and this can go into any behavior, even like your halt or tying or walk, trot, canter, or in this case, jumping, the behavior as a whole is important. You don't want to just reward that your horse took the jump. You can reward just the jump when you're working on the ground, but then you have to work it up to, this extent before you start doing it under saddle, so you avoid your horse doing a literal sliding stop on the back end of the jump. And it just overall pays to teach your horse the meaning of like good girl and good boy, so that they can feel that emotional response when you are happy and can kind of verbally reward them, but then only ask for that reward payment when you give your real bridge.
Yeah, and that's the keep going signal is what Caine is referring to with the good boy or good girl. So that's a solution that I hadn't thought of, which is a really good point, that when you go over the jump, you could say good boy and canter away, and then maybe break to a trot transition and then click, and so that the horse knows, you've got some distance there, and that slowing is what you're rewarding for, but that the jump was part of it. But you have to work up to that, and I think that's where the groundwork really plays into this. But the more I think about it, the more I think that a horse that's sliding to stop has some anxiety. And I said enthusiasm at the beginning because I'm a little bit jealous, because Zoe sometimes would just not stop, and I had to slow her down and then give her the treat. And I was like, that defeats the purpose. So it's good. You've got a good thing going, but, it might be worth considering how much are you asking for while you're doing it. Are you asking the horse to trot and then canter and then approach the jump and then you're clicking without having built up that duration? And then the horse is like, finally, yes, okay, give me the treat, and so if you've built a little bit of anxiety there, then I would just take it a few steps a lot back and, work on having calm, relaxed behaviors and having the horse respond to the click, with that enthusiasm, but also in a calm, confident manner, so that it's safe for both of you. And, like Caine said, you could almost install it from the ground that the departure from the fence is a part of the behavior. I don't disagree with clicking for jumping, but, it really depends on your horse, and it's going to be a judgment call on you. So I would play around with a couple of things and take it back a couple of steps for now. And because you're saying it's happening at the trot and the canter, so you might just be asking for too long in between. If you're trotting for, 3 minutes and then you're clicking, the horse might not have built up the training savviness to know that the click is going to come and it's not this huge deal. Or your reinforcers might be too high value. If you're using like a sugary, like my favorites were always the knicker makers. They're straight molasses. And so they could be too reinforcing and you might need to back off a little bit and use like an alfalfa pellet or something, or even hay. So, yeah, those are some.
Well, I like that it could just be too high value reinforcement. My last thing to add is that it could just very well be that you shaped that stop into the shaped behavior as a whole.
That's true too.
And that's where it ties into what will make you a good trainer is when you first teach things that you can predict something like that will happen, so that the choices that you in training something will avoid that, or at the very least when things like that happen, you can train your horse out of it and shape the behavior otherwise.
Yeah, and I think we've provided a few potential solutions to that. So I think we can move on to number 14. So my horse always tries to stop for treats when not asked. This ties right into that one. She tends to just spin until she's fed, so I'm having to use negative reinforcement to go forward. So I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think that, because I've actually experienced this with V-Stow, our little Appaloosa pony that we sold. He, I wanted to use positive reinforcement with him, but I wasn't at a point where, I had worked on it at all with him. I just started in the saddle, which was, the dumbest trainer move. So I'm telling you, listeners, don't do that. Learn from my mistakes. Don't start positive reinforcement in the saddle, because he had no concept of anything else. And so he was just like, oh, you're giving me food? Okay, hey, hand it to me. And he didn't understand that it was a consequence of doing the right thing. And that's really, really important when you're starting to consider training with positive reinforcement, because you have to teach the horse that. You can't just expect them to understand that any more than you can expect them to come fresh out of the stall ready to lift through their withers and engage their hind end. You have to teach it. And so with this, I would say that, the answer is not to, because the first part of the question says she always tries to stop for treats and spins until she's fed. If you are feeding her to get rid of that behavior, it's very similar to people that have horses that nose them in the cross ties, and they're just all over you, and then you're just like, oh my God, take the food, get off of me. You've actually reinforced the behavior. So if the horse is spinning after she stopped for treats, begging for it, and you're like, oh my God, just take it so you'll stop, you're creating that as an installed behavior, and then she's going to keep doing it. And if you only do it occasionally, and then sometimes you ask her to go forward with negative reinforcement, this is getting a little bit technical, but you're actually creating a variable reinforcement schedule, so the horse doesn't know whether or not they're going to get reinforced for the spinning behavior or not. And when you do it intermittently like that, you actually strengthen the behavior. So if you only reward her sometimes for the spinning, she's going to go through a longer extinction period to make that behavior stop. What I would do instead of just letting her extinguish the behavior is do the differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. Oh dear, so many science terms. But essentially, just like she can't go forward at the same time as she's spinning. So create a better reinforcement history for her going forward and then stopping and then you reinforcing. But because she can't do that at the same time as she's spinning, asking for a treat. And she also can't get a treat for just stopping on her own. But as we have said 1,000 times in this episode, that all ties back to groundwork. If the horse doesn't know it on the ground and isn't proficient at it and thinks they have to come to you for the food, say like with the lunging example, when the horse is out on the circle, if you click them and they're coming to you to get the food, the horse isn't understanding that you will always bring it to them. You have to teach them those rules of, that they can count on before you take it into the saddle, because this, personally for me, this would be very frustrating and it sounds like a mess. And I'm sure it's very frustrating for the rider and you're just like, oh my God, this sucks. So I would say that you need to take it back to the ground and really make sure that those things are reinforced. And then when you start getting back into the saddle, don't just go off willy-nilly. You need to reinforce for standing and you need to have a clear walk-on cue, a click, and then a lean up and reinforce for it. But that all starts at the standing still, because you have to make sure your horse is okay with you leaning all around their body to hand them the treat. And you also need to make sure that you have a walk-on cue. Whether, like in our past episodes, Caine talked about how they did the transfer to walking on with the leg cue, and then oh God, what am I trying to say? Or a verbal cue. That's where I'm going. So
yeah.
Any of those things you can do to have extra clarity in the saddle, and then you're not just having to use negative reinforcement to make the horse go forward. That's a solving the problem in the situation, not before the situation happens, which is what good training is setting the situation up so that you don't run into issues. So you've run into an issue and now you got to go back and set it up for there not to be issues, if that makes any sense at all. Good God. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I only have one answer to that question, and it's very simply, if your horse is asking you for treats at times that you have not signaled, then it means your horse is calling you out for not bridging every single time that you give a treat. And that's literally all I have to say about it.
Yeah, and I think that could definitely be confusing if the horse is just like, okay, give me food to me it just sounds like the horse isn't understanding that the consequence aspect of it, that there is a behavior and then there is a consequence, which is the reinforcement. So that behavior has to come first.
Yeah.
Okay. My throat hurts from talking so much. Oh my God. Okay, so number 15. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, cool. Number 15 is, how can I use positive reinforcement to help a former lesson horse that loves to balk on the ground and under saddle? I'm going to let Caine take this one, but the first thing I want to say is I don't like saying that loves to balk on the ground and under saddle.
Oh man, I was gonna say that.
Took it from you. It's the same as the fighting thing. Like, the horse isn't loving that behavior, and if they are, it's concerning because there's something else wrong. But I'm gonna let you take that one.
Well, especially being a former lesson horse, I guarantee you that horse has either back problems or has been ridden in saddles that don't fit it. Yep. Yeah, that's the very first thing.
Yes.
As far as trying to shape behaviors going out of that, again, can't say it enough, go back to groundwork. But whether you're going to treat this on the ground or if you're going to, people do this, we recommend against it, but they'll still do it, and that's fine. We can work with it from there. If you want to just directly work with it in the saddle or from the saddle, you shouldn't be focusing on what the horse isn't doing or what the horse is not responding to. You need to focus on, what is happening. And especially if, your horse is going forward, he doesn't want to go up to trot, then create responses to movement going forward. Can you get a bigger walk, especially in your transitions? Can you come down to a walk and then very quickly come down to a halt and then very quickly go back up to walk? Just creating forward movement and giving rewards for forward movement so that the horse associates that, okay, traveling forward and moving faster is not a bad thing, especially, like we said, it's a former lesson horse, so especially that it's not a painful thing. But I had to go through this with Jack. He was a quarter horse Arab cross that I was training, who just, he did this, is that he would balk constantly. It was that I tried to do anything faster than a walk under saddle and he would just stop. Or like the more extreme is he would stop and spin or something like that. So I went on the ground and I literally was just a lunatic. I just ran around with him on the ground and made forward movement such a fun thing for him that, you know, when we went back into the saddle, nothing was an issue. He was like, oh yeah, moving forward is very fun.
Yeah. I think that is a super point, that you can definitely involve play, which is a core emotion. That, you know, you can have those fun times and create a new association, just like everything else. The one thing that I want to add, obviously, Caine said that there is the pain aspect. You have to rule that out. I would get a body worker, chiropractor, you know, possibly a vet for x-rays, you know, just to make sure you understand what you're working with, because horses can't tell us, and it's really not fair to just be like, he's fine, I just think I'm going to try training it. I know it's expensive, but the horse he doesn't have the opportunity to tell you if something is bothering him outside of behaviors like this. And, you know, it might not be a training issue. So I would really spend the time and the money trying to rule that out before you proceed. And, you know, as a person that has a body, I know that things go wrong, and sometimes you're just sore or you don't feel like it today. And horses have days like that too, where they've just, you know, maybe they've played around in the paddock, they've pulled a muscle or something, and then, you know, being a lesson horse, maybe that happened, and then he got forced to do it anyway, and then he just created a really nasty association with riding. There are any number of possible solution, or I guess explanations for it, but ruling out that pain and then counter conditioning is the best thing you can do. But the last component, sorry, I tried not to burp. The last component that I want to add is, where is he going when he's balking and on the ground and under saddle? Because I used to have this very same problem with Zoe and Bo before her, and they would always balk going to the arena, and it was so annoying. And they would stop like probably 15 times on the way to the arena, and it was not a long walk. And I was like, this is so annoying, oh my god, come on. And I would just laugh and tap them on the hip with a whip, and, you know, then they would start walking again. Now I have the opposite problem, where when I'm in the arena with Zoe and I want to walk her back, she doesn't want to leave, and she balks on the way back. She'll happily march to the arena, but I can't get her to come back, and it's because she doesn't want me to stop with the reinforcement. You know, she's enjoying the training that we're doing, and you know, because I'm just giving her alfalfa pellets, there has to be a level of, I actually enjoy this, because the alfalfa pellets are not that reinforcing, and I've seen it happen. So the solution to that would be that I have to make the cross ties a really good place to be, reward her for standing, or ask her for some more fun behaviors in those places. And then when I take her back out to the paddock, maybe allot some time that I can work out there with her too, so that no part of it is like, oh, you're about to leave me. Like, you know, it's never fun when your buddy leaves your house, you know, and so it's a similar situation. So make the whole process really fun and good, so that, you know, you can get from point A to point B and have a happy horse that you don't have to like beat on to get to go forward.
Well, and then ruling out back pain and ulcers, the last thing I can think of, if you want to think of it more positively, or, you know, not every lesson program is bad or negative, consider what his training is, especially if he's carried children a lot. Is he used to having to stop to compensate for unbalanced children and feeling like he needs to give them a chance to rebalance? If he's Western, then maybe he has some ounce of reining training, like maybe if you lean forward too far or lean backwards too far, or if you squeeze your knees, or if you throw your legs forward, is he stopping because of that? Because that's just what he's been trained to do. So just considering, you know, your horse's background and how he has responded in the past, and, you know, again, not just thinking he's not doing what I want, but rather like, what can I get him to enjoy? Yeah,
and beyond that, that he loves to do the things that I don't want him to do. You're putting the onus of responsibility on the horse, and it's not the horse's responsibility. The horse is just being a horse. He's responding to what has been most reinforcing to him and what he finds most valuable. So that's what I have to say about that. So make something else more valuable, but only after you rule out pain and discomfort. Like if his teeth need to be done, his saddle doesn't fit, back pain, ulcers, blah, 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 all of those things. Sometimes it can just be as simple as he needs a girth change. It all depends on the individual.
Sounds good.
Yes. So question 16 is actually very similar. It's trot and canter cues to a horse that balks under saddle when I ask for more than a walk, and which is what you just said about one of your horses. And he has been fully cleared by the vet that it's not a health issue. So I think we can quickly run through this one. And since you've had a direct similar experience, I will let you take it.
Well, yeah, it's basically what we just said, like, and especially my example with Jack is just getting him to enjoy moving forward, because I'm sure that in the past he had painful associations, that he had ulcers that were untreated, but by the time that I worked with him, Jack, he was cleared by a vet, and there was nothing wrong with him other than mentally. He was like, no, this is terrible. Every single time that a rider asks me to go forward faster than this, that I hate it. For him also, actually, now that I'm remembering it, he hated an unbalanced rider, and he hated having a beginner rider. He wanted a perfect seat, perfect fluidity. And now that I think about it, Luke is really similar. Luke does not typically accept someone who's going to clunk around in his saddle. So stuff like that. Just, are you fluid with your horse? Are you making it easy? If he doesn't enjoy it, then why isn't he enjoying it? Not just, my horse is not doing what I'm asking him to do.
Right. Yeah, and I think, it sucks to hear that some horses don't enjoy unbalanced riders, but it comes right back to this running 10 miles with a backpack on. So you're fit and you're healthy and you're able to do it. But instead of having a backpack on that's strapped tightly to you and is secure, you have a child on your back, or even a cat that is wiggling around, pulling you sideways and throwing you off balance, bouncing lower on your back and pulling you backwards while you're trying to move forwards, or leaning so far forward that you're having to run faster to keep your steps. So, those are all things that it can be really difficult for horses to deal with, because I saw a post today that it was from Saddle Fit for Life. It was, riding's not just about staying on the horse. It's about being balanced for the horse, because you want the horse to be riding with you, not riding trying to correct you and keep you on top of them the whole time. And so I think it's really important to consider that as well, that, you might just have to prove yourself to the horse and be like, I'm not going to, bump around on you the whole time and bebop and half fall off the whole time and throw you off balance. And, that might have to take place outside of the saddle. You might have to do some core and calf strengthening exercises. You might have to do a lot of planks or something to build your own strength, so that when you get in the saddle, you can prove to him, like, I've got this. I have my balance, and we will work on this together, but I'm not going to compromise you in the process,
Well, and even back to how was the horse trained? Like for Luke, when he arrived, he was really, really slow off the leg, or just dull and responsive to the leg. So I went to the lunge line and I taught him voice commands, and now he's quick off the leg. You really don't have to do anything.
Right.
Snowy, on the other hand, when I started riding Snowy, she was, if any horse was a puzzle to put together, she was it. She likes a very specific leg. She doesn't want you to take your leg all the way off. She doesn't want you to squeeze your leg. She wants you to kind of just set it there and then let her do the rest off the voice. Like, just that little bit of comfort to it. So that's another thing to consider, is maybe your horse just wants you to take your leg off, or put your leg on, or just, change something small that makes him more comfortable.
Right. And that ties into the individual and also reinforcement history. If they've just had a really bad go with legs, then, maybe it's just easier to install some vocal commands and then have it done that way. And then you've changed the reinforcement history so that now they know, because maybe walk was used and they don't like that word. So now you have to say pineapple. And when they go forward, they know that they're going to get reinforced, and it's a good word. It has good associations. It's a good cue. It becomes a secondary reinforcer, or a tertiary reinforcer, I guess, itself. And then, so the horse enjoys those behaviors, whereas the leg cue might take some more counter conditioning to get over. Okay, so number 17 is, how do you keep your horse from offering things all the time, i.e. cantering when unwanted?
I have a lot of experience with this, actually. Obviously, again, I have a lot of really hot horses. Most of them are very, very engaging horses, but that really is individual per horse. I do like a really engaged horse, and I've actually lately gone back to one of my horses, Lovely, who I rescued, I think 2 years ago now. Oh my God, I hope it's not 3 years. I think it's 2 years ago. When I rescued her, I kind of, I found a pasture for her, put her in with a bunch of friends, and in our 2 years together, yes, I've ridden her a bit, yes, I've played with her a bit, but overall, she's had just a really simple life. She recently moved closer to me, and I have an opportunity to work with her almost every single day. She has no engagement. She has no food motivation. She does not want to do anything. And so it's really made me appreciate that most of my other horses do kind of jokingly harass me with their behaviors. Like, they're just so engaged.
Yeah.
And it does make me want to turn Lovely into that. But as far as handling that engagement, Nova is very bright and very quick. So I can typically direct him into behaviors equally as quickly, and that tends to work with him, is just keeping his mind active. Eventually there's enough structure to it and enough performance to it that he does kind of settle into a bit of a routine for each session. For other horses, if it's just really overwhelming, or like for some horses that will really get into your space that of course not every person appreciates, then direct them to slower, steadier stuff. Like, maybe start your session with just targeting and walking from one target to the next to kind of bring down that energy. But also for you, what energy are you bringing to the table? Are you mirroring their engagement and their excitement, or are you breathing and taking slow steps and controlled steps and kind of giving them an example of what you want them to mirror? I think that's pretty much the most I can say off of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that to make it, clear in behaviorist terms, cantering when unwanted is, it just means that you don't have it on stimulus control. I had a similar issue with Zoe having, with the hip targeting, because, oh my God, that is her favorite trick. It used to be smile, and then I taught her the hip target, and she was like, look, Mom, I can do a 360, and I don't even need you anywhere near me. And I'm like, oh my God. And so putting it on stimulus control might mean alternating cues between an incompatible behavior. Like for Zoe, I used back because like the whoa or standing cue wasn't clear enough, and like it's not strong enough for her, but she knows back really well. So I would teach her, or I would cue her for back, and if she stepped her hip sideways, we might walk around, reset, and I would cue her again for back. And then once I got the back, I would click and treat for that and do that a couple times, and then I would cue her for the hip target, do that a couple times, and then go back to the back cue. So I was alternating to make sure that she understood the actual cue. It didn't have anything to do with my body position, and like oriented around her. Like, I didn't have to be in front of her to say back, and I didn't have to be at her hip to say hip. And so things like that, with cantering, you have to, whatever your cue is, if it's a leg cue or a vocal cue, you have to make sure that you reinforce when you ask and put it on stimulus control, not just when the horse does it. And then
I like that word, stimulus control.
Yeah, it's see, that book learning, it do pay.
It do.
Yeah, so, and it's, if the horse does offer canter and it's not exactly what you want, cue something that they do know. Like maybe they know the word trot. So if the horse picks up canter, you say cheer-rot or cheer-rot, depending on where you are. And then when they do the trot, click for the trot. And, maybe click the downward. It depends on, what you're going for. But then only click for the canter when you ask for it. So
I like that.
Yes.
It's a good answer.
Thank you. Okay, are we good?
Well, yeah, I'm actually reading the next question, and it's kind of the same thing in what we all talked about.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so 18, how to deal with a high-energy horse. Mine seems to never be focused on me because he always gets too excited. I really like that about him, but it's hard to train, especially with food. Kind of similar, but a little bit of a different example. I went through something similar with Gulliver in that his food motivation outweighed his performance motivation. That actually made it a little more possible to reward fewer behaviors. But what I mean by that is you don't want to reward less. Like if your horse especially is used to the rewards associated with a behavior, the less you reward that, or if you take the rewards away from that, then your behavior is going to decrease. But it's just that I was rewarding less to it. So kind of just stacking fewer behaviors. You could say maybe having a higher expectation for what he would do, but that's also what I mean by this is a different example, because Gulliver was not a high energy horse. With high energy horses, again, it's just directing that energy, but also, again, being conscious of yours. Give them something to do. If they especially just have a lot of energy, then maybe for that day you're just going to do some high energy stuff. If you can bring that energy down at the beginning of the session, like I said, with maybe just targeting or doing slow and steady things. If it's not slow, then it's at least controlled. Then just bring them down to that threshold and go from there.
Yeah, I definitely think that is a huge key piece to working with high energy horses, because like Zoe is very high energy, and in our sessions when we do higher energy behaviors, I really have to make sure that I balance that out with bringing her back down, and that teaches her how to go up and come back down. A lot of horses, just like people, are not taught how to regulate emotionally, so you have to give them a helping hand and allow them to go up and then bring them back down. I would not ask them to go up unless you can bring them back down. And that starts all at your foundation. But like with Lyra, and I've only posted about this once, that's Lexi, but we changed her name because I didn't think it fit her. So her name is Lyra now. But with her, I pulled her out of her paddock, and she was instantly like, whoa, what are we doing? We've never done this before, and so not that she's never been out of her paddock, but for a training session, and it's been a minute. So when I pulled her out, she wanted to move. I could tell she was a little bit anxious, but we were just right outside her pasture fence, but her buddy is in there and he is pushy with her. And so I wanted her to come outside and just work where we weren't inhibited by him. And she, like, asking her to stand with all four planted on the floor was not fair, because she would have been struggling emotionally with, I have a lot of energy right now, I'm worried, and I need to move, and by asking her to stand, I'm setting her up for failure. So what I did was I would have her walk forward and follow me, and, I'd ask her to move her head away from me and turn, and I was clicking and reinforcing for all of that, but then I would really reinforce when she was standing. So, maybe I would click while she was standing and reinforce her for that, or maybe I'd just feed her a couple of handfuls for walking and responding to the cues I was asking when we were moving forward. So I'm bringing her up, having her walk, and having her expend some of that energy, and then when we're bringing her back down, I'm letting her settle and eat and release all those feel-good, relax hormones, and so we're going back into rest and digest. And so I think that's what's really helpful with horses like that. With Zoe, I mean, like I said, we bring her up and I bring her back down. And I think that's super helpful to work with high energy horses. Another thing to consider is, like we were saying with the anxiety thing, especially if he's having a problem being too excited, especially with food, sometimes that can be because you're not reinforcing enough. Like with Gulliver, Caine was talking about, he's a little bit lower energy, so you kind of had to maybe not reinforce as often. Sometimes with a horse that has high energy, I would do the opposite, where you reinforce a lot for low energy things, because the chewing actually releases like dopamine and those rest and digest hormones that bring them out of the sympathetic into the parasympathetic nervous system, and you get them to relax and settle. But if I think there's a balance with high energy horses. It's not fair to ask them to stand planted square and not move when they've got some energy. So have them do something that can expend some of it, that's safe. And maybe you start in protected contact and you let them get some of that energy out by moving forward, trotting, whatever, clicking, and then maybe have them target and stand for a second and then go back up and then come back down. And then you're working on having that sliding scale established so that they learn how to bring themselves back down. And that will translate to everything that you do with them, because then they'll know, okay, I can get amped, but I also know how to bring myself back down. And that way you don't have this horse that's getting ramped the whole time. And if they're really excited about food, I would start in protected contact just so that you and him stay safe and you don't have to, use any punishment. You can always just step out. But having a higher rate of reinforcement can really help lower that anxiety. And sometimes with horses that get anxious, I feed a lot. Like I said with Lyra, when I pulled her out and she was really anxious. When I would click and reinforce, I would offer her as much as she would eat in that moment. And then when I felt like she was about to take a step, I would go ahead and cue her for a walk. And then we would move on and I would ask her for a few more things. And then I would click her and then treat and feed her, and then so she was coming up and then she was coming down. But the trick was learning how to read her when I thought she was about to walk, so I was cueing it, which goes back to the natural horsemanship, make it your idea thing. But that way she was being successful already. She was letting me know, okay, I think I'm ready to walk. I would cue it, and then I would click for the things that I asked for, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. And that way you're working with the horse, and then you're getting them kind of over that threshold of like, oh my God, I'm so excited. And, keeping that reinforcement rate high, at least at the beginning, can be really helpful in settling them because of those hormone releases and neurotransmitters, and also just allowing them to kind of like be like, okay, the food is coming. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, but that's good. That's all good.
Okay. Cool beans. Do you have anything you want to add?
I just had a very brief thought when you brought up natural horsemanship, because I've been watching a lot of Warwick Schiller videos recently.
Me
if
too.
there were any natural horsemanship trainer I would choose, it would be him.
100%.
100%. And he just talks a lot about keeping your horse's attention on you, and that's basically what you do when you have a high rate of reinforcement, is that you're just making sure that your horse is focused on you and what the two of you are doing, rather than his stimuli, his environment, his energy, all of that.
Yeah.
Just keeping the horse's attention focused.
Believe it or not, he is actually the one that I learned that emotional control thing from, because he brought it up and I'd never thought about it before. And
he loves that, the breathing and the
and the polyvagal theory. He has a few videos on it, and while I don't know that I would necessarily go his route of how he uses it, I think it is by far the most kind version of I guess negative reinforcement traditional training. But even then, sometimes it's like, I don't even know if it's negative reinforcement because it's so kind and subtle. But he talks a lot about like bringing it up and bringing it back down and allowing the horses to choose that and letting them be successful and teaching them how to do it. And I think that that's what works really well. And I've been doing it intuitively, but now that I know what I'm doing, I can do it even better now. And that's what I love about things like that, is like, even though I don't want to do exactly what he does, I look at it and I'm like, how can I translate that to positive reinforcement? And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is what we're going to do. And it works the same. It's just a different route to the same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But good point bringing him up. So
I like him.
I do too. He's so cool. And I mean, I like I said, I don't agree with everything, but I think 90% of what he does and says, I'm just like, oh, if everyone that was traditional or negative reinforcement or natural horsemanship did what he does, I probably never would have left. It's so cool. But yeah, so number 19 is I treat my boys on the ground, but have been told not to treat them while I'm riding because it'll make them misbehave. Thoughts? They're very food motivated and have never been pushy around it.
The way the question is phrased, I think that this person rides within some kind of riding academy.
Yeah.
And that's just, is what whoever told them that or whatever they heard, then how do they define misbehaving? I do have a client where I exercise his horse. I've only briefly mentioned him ever. His name is Chewy. He's this tiny little quarter horse that I ride. Super fun. But his owner told me just literally the only sentence he said was no bad habits. He knows that I treat my horses a lot. He knows how I train horses. Chewy is named Chewy for a reason. He's extremely mouthy with everything. Even when you have him tied, he tries to consume his lead rope. So with Chewy, it was just very simply, I only give him treats in his stall, and the moment he comes out, like when he's tied and when we're riding, we don't involve food. But then again, I understand his owner's definition of, quote, misbehaving. So what I'm assuming is the instructors around this person asking this question probably just don't want the horses, stopping for food or pushing people for food, or overall just unprompted asking for food. So that's just, is be careful and be aware of how you're rewarding. It kind of goes back into one of the questions we talked about earlier, is just to be, have structure to how you give food and when you give food, and for what,
Right.
and just considering the people around you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it definitely sounds similar, that it's just like you're in a riding school and you've got a trainer that's like, hey, don't give them food. It'll make them misbehave. It's a very, very common misconception. Probably not their fault. That's just probably what they've been told growing up through their whole riding career, and they've never questioned it because it is just law. But the truth is that, honestly, treating them and teaching them how to behave around food is the best way to make them not misbehave. People that just say, we're not doing treats at all, the horse never learns how to behave around food and people. But when, the only way, in my opinion, to fix pushy or muggy horses around food is to use food.
Well, because you don't teach a horse who doesn't load on a trailer to do it without a trailer.
Yes.
You don't teach trailer loading without trailers. You can't teach food manners without food.
Yeah, and the answer is not bopping them on the nose or anything like that. It's just simply, reinforcing them and feeding them where you want them to be when you have food, which is out of your space. And so riding is the same thing. You definitely, as we've said in earlier questions, you absolutely can easily teach a horse to misbehave with having treats under saddle. But if you know what you're doing, and by that I don't mean you have to have read every book out there, but if you have a plan, and it's a well thought out plan, it's an educated plan, and you've taken the time to read the books, maybe taken an online course or two, and you have an idea for how you want to proceed forward, then you will likely be successful. And where you're not, you can take a step back, reevaluate, and then proceed and see if you can address the issue in the way that you think is most appropriate. But it's all about learning how to develop your critical thinking and judgment skills, and that comes from education. So if you have no idea how to proceed riding with positive reinforcement, don't do it yet. Just keep doing what you're doing, and on the side, learn, educate yourself, and then when you feel like you're ready to get started, go for it. But don't do it without having a clue, because then you will prove those people right, and then you'll be like, oh, they were right, and everybody else is dumb. I'm going to keep doing this. So...
well, and then on the off chance that this person has omitted information in their question, considering that, we are assuming that this is in some kind of riding school, if these are actually your horses that you own, that you don't lease, that you own, then yes, take people's advice with a grain of salt, but then do what you want.
Right.
If these are lesson horses, or horses that you lease, or horses that you borrow, I'm sorry, but you have no choice. You have to listen to their owner, or to your instructor, or to whoever has guardianship over these horses. Because it's not just that you risk getting yelled at, it's that you risk the horse facing some kind of punishment for your actions.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, it's it's tricky, and it's I mean, not my favorite situation in the world, but I do agree, if it's not your horse and you don't have permission, I would not proceed unless you are absolutely confident that whatever behavior you are going to train, you can train, and then when somebody doesn't use positive reinforcement anymore, the behavior will maintain. Like, say the horse bites people and you train them not to bite, and then you tell people, okay, this is how you have to act around him if you want him to not bite you. These are his cues. Then you can proceed that way. But even then, you don't want that behavior to pop up when the reinforcement dies anymore, which theoretically, if it's done right, it shouldn't. But, things happen. So be careful if it's not your horse. If it is your horse, then I would, carry on.
Yeah.
So, number 20.
As we will do, we will carry on.
Yes, here we go. Number 20. How often do you click and reward a horse during a ride? Every time they do the correct thing, or after a sequence of correct things, or does it come with the more training you do? Ding, ding, ding. Last one's the answer.
Yeah, that last question is the answer. Because it varies on how much the horse knows, how green the horse is. Because, yes, at the start, I do have to reward every single time that I'm seeing a behavior that I want repeated. Obviously, then, as the training goes on, you can stack behaviors, and then the behavior you have on top is an incorporation of everything that you've built up below it. Exactly. So, for Nova is, I mean, I was about to say something, but then I caught myself. I really do still reward Nova for absolutely everything, but that's, again, he's a very high energy horse, and he knows a lot, and he progresses very, very quickly. I was going to say you might see me rewarding a horse like Lovely more than I would reward a horse like Nova, but that's still not the case, because Nova just pumps out actions. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, they kind of answered their own question. It depends on the training.
Right. And the thing is, like we've said it in a previous episode before, the best way to think about it is how often do you reinforce a negative reinforcement training? You reinforce everything. Every time you ask the horse to go forward, you put your leg on, and then you release the pressure. When the horse starts slowing down, you put your leg on, you release the pressure. When you need the horse to half halt, you tense your body and lift, and you might pull on the reins, and then when the horse half halts, you release. And so, everything you do, you are constantly asking, reinforcing. And so why is it any different in positive reinforcement? Well, because you have to stop. So in positive reinforcement, you have to learn how to do behavior chains, which is harder than just reinforcing every single step, because you wouldn't get anywhere trotting, one step clicking, trotting, one step clicking, and so you have to be able to build up duration, which requires an education and being a good trainer, just as it does in negative reinforcement. It's different. It's a different path to the same outcome. But, initially, yes, you will have to reinforce everything. And if you start lumping and asking for a bunch of things all at once, you're going to end up with a very confused and frustrated or anxious animal. So the best thing to do is be really strategic in the beginning, make sure you lay that foundation, and then gradually start building up with duration. And then you can start adding more cues and doing behavior chains like a turn, and then maybe a transition, and then building up and up and up and up until you're riding, 5 minutes, and then you click and treat and give them a walk break or a graze or something, and then carry on again. And so it's definitely much harder to do with positive reinforcement, but only for the reason that you have to make sure that you don't have any holes in your training, otherwise it will not work. Whereas with negative reinforcement, you can have endless holes. I mean, that's how I have founded my riding career, is on holes in my training. And because it still looks the same, because I don't have to stop and reinforce or count on the fact that my horse knows what he's doing. It's more of like, okay, he's not doing it, I'll apply more pressure or throw in a turn here or something,
Well, and this question just kind of looks like it's more just curiosity on what a ride would look like with a fully trained plus R horse. And I'm pretty sure I touched on that in at least one of the other episodes, but it's not like trot 3 steps, reward, trot 3 steps, reward. It does look like that if I'm teaching the horse trotting under saddle. But for example, with horses like Nova or like Bella, Nova, I can get all the way around the ring at a walk, trot, or canter before I have to reward him. But when we work on more strength exercises, like he's developing his walk to canter under saddle, then we do just a few transitions and reward every single transition. Then within a session, we work up to transition and 10-meter circle at the canter. And then by the time the session is over, it's transition and 20-meter circle at the canter. For Bella, it's that for her specifically, we do have to reward her at every single cone or target, but we can space those cones out really, really far. We might have to start again at the beginning of a session with just cone and then 10 strides to the next cone, but we can definitely work that up to all the way around the arena by now. Like, these horses have been doing it for more than a year, because Nova I've only had for a year. But yeah, it depends on the development of training.
Right. And also, I think you bring up a good point that, like, when you start to teach a new thing, you're going to have to go back. So, you're walk trotting and cantering for 5 minutes now, but you want to start introducing, like, the only thing I can think of is a canter pirouette, or let's do lateral movements. You can't expect 10 steps of lateral movements from the get-go. A, the horse is likely not strong enough, and B, it's a completely new behavior. So you get maybe one lateral step, click. It might not be the prettiest, but the horse is getting the idea, and then you're working in successive approximation until you get the end behavior. And it might take a couple sessions, but then eventually you can do those 10 steps, and that's usually all you really ever need for a dressage test. But so there's that. Oh, I had something else I wanted to think or touch on. Damn it. well, there it goes.
Oh, well.
Oh, well, it might come back, it might not.
I was going to say, it'll probably come back halfway through the next question.
Yep. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and move on. So, question 21, our second to last question. Hallelujah. So, I thought this question was really interesting from like a kind of philosophic standpoint. Oh. Yep, it happened.
There it is.
So, I was just going to say that, with riding and negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement, imagine like you're at your place of work and there are two scenarios. And in the first scenario, your boss says, hey, get your work done today or you're going to be fired. And in the second scenario, your boss says, hey, get your work done today and I will pay you. In both of those scenarios, you have different emotions and different motivations for why you're doing what you're doing, but in one of them you're getting paid and in the other it's just relief. So, sometimes it's comparable to training and riding your horse. And, if you're expecting them to go this 30-minute period of riding hard, transitions or a jumping course or whatever, you're expecting them to do all of this for not very much at the end. So make it fair to the horse. You're asking for a lot. So take some breaks, do it in short bursts, build up their strength, your strength, and reinforce them for it outside of just giving them relief from the things that they don't like you pulling or, pushing with your leg or kicking or spurring or things like that. It's just a different way to look at riding that, could potentially make your horse a little bit happier in the riding.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just a different way of riding.
Yeah. So that was slightly irrelevant, but I felt like it was a decent metaphor.
No, it is.
Thank you. Okay, question 21 is, we, as equitation scientists, often speak about a time when horse riders will lose our social license to operate, meaning that the non-riding public will see riding as cruel and a push for horses to not be ridden. I see so much cruelty to horses on Instagram and social media, TikTok. I deleted it for that reason. I was so tired of it. And often think that this day is quickly approaching, LOL, clicker trainer puns. So what can we do as positive reinforcement advocates to turn the tide on the court of opinion and show riding as a positive experience? So I think this is like, it ties into a lot of those videos of horses like tied to a pole and rearing up and, being unhappy that they're tied to a pole away from their buddies, and we call it a patience pole and we giggle at how silly their behavior is. Or, the horse is bucking and you have to show them who's boss. And to onlookers who don't understand horse training, it looks abusive, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that it is abusive. Like, to be kicking and beating a horse who is bucking and rearing is not, it's not good training. And I always see the comments where the Karens, me, are like, hey, let's not do this to our animals, please. Maybe ask why, is he in pain? And they're like, oh, you've clearly never worked with horses before. You just don't understand. You're just a Karen, a armchair coach or whatever. And while that might be true, I have worked with horses and in fact know that it's not good training. You're not listening to the animal. And when it looks abusive to onlookers who don't know anything, it's usually because it is. And so I thought this question was interesting for that reason, because I think it is a very valid concern. I don't think that it's ever going to get completely outlawed, but I think there are going to be some rule changes coming up in the next, couple of decades. But I don't know.
Well, decades, that could be hopeful. I mean, years, definitely no, but a couple of decades, that gives it enough time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the UK just, they're so far ahead of us with, like, not trimming whiskers, and you can ride bitless in shows. Like, why is it mandatory to ride in a bit? Like,
because it revolves around money. And that's actually one of the segments I have for this answer, is right back into that showing environment being catering around people. I think the next step is to see show environments become so much more horse friendly, and for show routines to become so much more horse friendly, or at least, horse catering. And that could, with showing, that can at least start with the media's response, because when you see that on the Olympics, maybe incorporate a little more information into it and show them, oh, this is what the horses are experiencing while they're here, and this is how happy they are, not just that they're in their stalls looking beautiful, right?
Yeah, or doing silly head bobbing behaviors. Oh my God, they love the music. No.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as far as simply not being abusive, I absolutely think that we're going to see that really soon. But it's just, the horse community has to change because we change as people. Like you said with the UK, we have to follow through with that, and we have to make bitless and bridleless options possible, even if it, isn't for you specifically, it is for someone else. I really look forward to seeing Olympic riders without spurs and whips or elaborate bridles and martingales. I think that the time is coming sooner and sooner, and I'm excited to see that. But again, it has to change because we do.
Yeah, and I think the thing that blows my mind the most is that, over in the UK and a lot of the shows, you can ride bridleless. And I get it's a safety thing, whatever, but it's your risk. You sign a waiver. They're not responsible for anything. But beyond that, everybody sees videos of these upper level riders doing their whole dressage test in a cordio or with no bridle at all, and they're like, oh my God, look how incredible that is, but it's illegal. But
that should be the basis.
Exactly.
If you're seeing the top riders do that, then that should be the new top thing.
Yes,
and that should be brought more forward.
I completely agree, and it's things like that. And then the other day, Astro, our colt, he had a cut on his leg, and I couldn't really get to it because he's grown in his winter coat and he's half Irish Draught, and so it's quite thick. And so I went to get these little cordless clippers, and when I was undoing the plastic wrap or the plastic case on the whatever, fuck it, you know what I mean. But it said great for clipping dog hair, horse whiskers, and I was like,
oh my God.
This is illegal in other parts of the world, and yet this product is being advertised for it. I just thought that was so bizarre, because there have been studies that show that we just don't, why? For aesthetic purposes, and your animal has a blind spot there and has literally evolved from nature to have those whiskers there so that they can sniff around and touch things without bopping their nose into it or cutting themselves, and then we're just going to shave them off because we think it looks bad.
Yeah.
It just
I think it's adorable, but also it's literally the form is the function. It's it's their blind spot, and it allows them to see, and we're just taking that away from them
because we think it isn't pretty, and they look better without little teeny tiny hairs that you can't even see in pictures. Okay, those are the things that I want to see change really bad. Just let people ride in what works best for their horses. I should not have to ride my horse in a bit so I can compete, because I'm not allowed to compete in a bitless bridle. What? And for what reason? Because the dressage tests have it written into them that the horse must be obedient to the bridle. Oh, sorry, it didn't say bit. What the hell? It doesn't make any sense. And I could go on forever about rules. It's so frustrating. And then jumpers, you can ride in a damn war bit. You don't have to have a head stall at all, or a bridle. You can ride bridleless in most jumpers. So I'm why is eventing and dressage so far behind? What? But I am trying to lose my voice.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that one.
Okay, so anyway, the question is, what can we do as positive reinforcement advocates to turn the tide of on the court of public opinion to show riding as a positive experience?
I would like to answer this neutrally, as whatever method you do. And I'm actually going to read a short paragraph that I have in one of the guides that I make for my clients. I like to do little session summaries. But this guide was specifically for someone who asked, I might not want to do positive reinforcement. And I'm like, well, first of all, you're going to see a decrease in that behavior that I just taught with positive reinforcement. But
here
is my paragraph.
Okay.
It's fine to not practice plus R for every single behavior, but you have to maintain two-way communication. Always take no for an answer. Avoid stacking triggers, so also identifying triggers and tension in your horse, and work in controlled, no tension, quote, level 0 environments so that your horse can remain calm enough to focus and respond. This also means identifying when your horse is able to respond to a cue. So if you ask for a cue when you don't have the correct attention from your horse is likely to not respond or to respond poorly, and that's unfair to him as it sets up an answer for failure. Additionally, by remaining at level 0, it's easier to maintain that calmness. When you reach a level of tension, you must first remove that tension before you can carry on in any way. So I think that's how we're going to start to see that change in media reception and how we present equestrianism as a whole is, creating more two-way communication environments, at least if you're going to continue with -R and traditional methods, that you are respecting your horse as an individual, as a living being, and that your training is revolving around that two-way communication and not just you telling your horse what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that's what happened in the dog world. And, that's not to say that there aren't still trainers out there that advocate for Cesar Millan-esque training and prong collars and things like that. But, I mean, most trainers now use positive reinforcement with dogs, and now it is frowned upon to hit your dog or use a pinch, shock, or choke collar. And those things are not accepted by the public anymore, but it was a shift in opinion because of the science that came out. And so I think that a huge part of that as well is bringing the science to more public awareness so that more people have the information to be able to make those intelligent calls instead of just, and it's not to say that, the calls that other people are making that don't have access to that information are making unintelligent calls, but they're just uninformed. You can't make a decision about something you have no idea about. So when you know why the horse is doing what they're doing, or you understand their ethology and you understand learning principles and behavior, then you are better able to make decisions and also get the behaviors you want in a way that is more rewarding for the horse. And then you create a horse that says yes instead of one that you have no idea if he'll say no because you're too afraid to allow him to say no. And so I think that is the bigger issue. I think, I think a big thing that would change public opinion too is whips and spurs. And I'm not here to say that those things are horrible, tools to use. I think that they can have a place depending on how they're used. Obviously,
I use spurs.
Yeah, and I've used them recently as well, but on Flit, my boss's horse. But when I competed him, I rode him in spurs. And so, but that was to mitigate the effect that I would have had to kick him super hard to get him to go forward. And the spurs were allowed us to have a little bit clearer communication without so much banging on his sides, even though it's sharper and isn't distributed over a larger area like my leg would be. It got the behavior so I didn't have to beat him. But that's not this episode. But but the reason I used them was because I thought it would be kinder than kicking the snot out of him. And also I hadn't had any time to work on the behavior prior because he's not my horse and he is trained traditionally. So, when you have situations like that, you have to make calls. But I think that when people look at riders and they see, on cross country, you're coming down to the big water jump and the rider is leaned all the way back, bouncing on their horse's back with both reins in one hand, smacking the horse till the cows come home on the hind end while they're digging their spurs in the side, and Marilyn Little's got her bloody horse's mouth and got this contraption on her horse's face. Yeah, that doesn't look great. So I think if we didn't have spurs and whips, because none of those things would ever fly with any other species of animal ever, cat, dog, cow, maybe? I don't know, donkeys, humans, you would never use those things on another creature, but for some reason it's okay with horses because they don't yelp. But it's just it doesn't look right, and also you don't have to use those things. For instance, in my example with Flit, the reason I used them is because I didn't have training. I didn't take the time and put the training in to where I wouldn't need to. And that would have been through conditioning and making sure he was fit and fit enough to do what I was asking. So it's not fair, but I use them in I guess, as kind of a last resort, but still staying within Lima, I guess, like least intrusive, minimally aversive, because I felt it would have been worse to beat him with my legs than to just poke him with a spur once. And also, for the record, the spurs were the Tapestry Equine spur suaders, so they're like these round, you can look them up better than I can explain it, but it's kind of like a tom thumb, and then it has like a coin sitting on it, and the coin is very round, so no part of it is sharp, and they are specifically designed for sensitive horses, because I got them when I was showing Zoe, and she went much better in them than anything else, but they look weird, but I prefer them to anything else because they are very soft. So anyway, that is my spiel, but I think that if we change some of the equipment and, like if bridleless were allowed, the onlookers, the ignorant onlookers would be able to be like, oh my God, look, that horse is doing it without a bridle. He must love his job, and just creating an environment where the horses look like they're enjoying their jobs because they are, not because they're being forced to, and you have to say like, oh, well, horses are big, so, you have to show them who's boss. That's the justification, and that doesn't make any sense. So, I'm done answering the question now. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think we got pretty much everything on that, too.
Yeah. So the last question is, do you believe it's possible to interact with horses using solely positive reinforcement, and should you?
So you asked me to answer this really politely, so I will. But I'm still going to be blunt about it because who am I?
I know. And I will damage control on the backside.
I think that humans, and especially humans that have been trained traditionally with horses, want any excuse to punish their horse and to smack their horse or tell their horse what to do or to just cease a behavior as quickly as possible.
It's easier.
I think that
you don't have to train it.
Yeah. I do 100% believe it's possible to interact with horses using solely positive reinforcement because that is all I do. I do not smack any of my horses. None of my Arabs know punishment, especially Nova. I think I may have given this example in one of the last episodes how I once swung a rope at him and accidentally deleted an entire behavior and replaced it with something else that I then had to completely go in and reshape over the course of 2 months.
I don't think you did.
Oh, I didn't. Well, I have plenty of that. I can be really brief about that if I can find that in one of my answers. Let me see if I have it somewhere in here. Oh boy, I'm trying not to stall this.
Yeah, I mean, I can.
But anyway, yes, it's 100% possible to do things with solely plus R. It's just that you have to catch yourself when you're thinking, why do you want to punish something so badly?
Yeah, and I think that there is a level of negative reinforcement that has to be used. And I don't say that because there's no way you could interact with a horse only using positive reinforcement. I say that because the popular interactions with horses are based in negative reinforcement, and if your horse does not know how to respond to traditional cues, you're setting the horse up for failure in the event that you die and the horse is no longer in your care. If you have a horse that has never been trained how to give to halter pressure and you've only ever targeted them to places, great. But if you die and somebody else takes your horse, the horse isn't going to be able to load onto a trailer because nobody's there to tell the people that have the horse now that you used to use a target. They're just going to pull the horse and, start bringing the whips out and the panels and shoving the horse onto the trailer. And, so...
Because it's quick and it solves it only in that moment. And to them, it's like, oh, I've solved it completely. It's like, no, you haven't.
Yeah, and if that, probably created more issues. But I do agree that there is a resistance to not wanting, or a resistance to stopping using punishment, because I think by taking the initiative to stop using punishment, there has to first be some acknowledgement of the fact that that is obsolete and also unnecessary and harmful to the animal. Because if, in order for you to stop using it, you have to recognize one of those things, and that can be really uncomfortable ego-wise and emotionally, because you love your animal and you want to work with your horse and you want to demonstrate that you love them. And, you know, in Western society, being a disciplinarian is often applauded because you're doing it out of love, but the animal's not going to understand that, and the only thing you're communicating to them is that behavior is wrong, and you're not giving them any alternative. And so I think that you absolutely can just use positive reinforcement, but I think that there needs to be some amount of at least equal cue that, you know, you could teach a horse to lead or do anything really through positive reinforcement, like we talked about in the previous episodes with riding. You can make it all look very similar so that the horse would respond the same way if a traditional person were to acquire the horse. But I don't think it's entirely the worst thing in the world to use negative reinforcement either. I think that you can definitely use both, and I don't think that, at least in the current climate that we have with most people training traditionally, I don't think it's fair to the horse to only use positive reinforcement. I think you have to give them some level of education with negative reinforcement, and I would do that in a few different ways. You know, I would teach them how to do a lot of the things through positive reinforcement that look very similar to negative reinforcement. For instance, with Azula, I did not touch her to teach her how to pick up her feet. It was only after I had her picking up her feet that I would run my hand, actually, that might not be true. I would run my hand down her leg and she would pick up her foot and then I would click, but I never held it until she was uncomfortable or she gave up or used a rope or squeezed her tendons or anything like that. You know, but if a negative reinforcement person were to ask her to pick up her foot, she would do it, but not because of the way that they're used to the horse having learned it, but because I trained it to look the same.
Yeah, and I do the same as that.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that you can go that route, or you could just teach them how to give to pressure in a very kind, non-escalating way. Like Warwick Schiller's a really good person for stuff like that. Obviously, proceed with caution into the traditional training. I will say it again for the 1,000th time, don't agree with everything he does, but I really do love a lot of what he does. So, you know, you can go about it like that, but at this juncture, like with dogs, for instance, teaching them how to sit, you could teach a dog how to sit with a treat, and you know, if you died and that dog went to somebody else, they could still get the dog to sit, because most people would go the route of the treat, not the other route that, you know, is used through negative reinforcement. So
well, and that's the reason I came into this question so cynical too, is because usually we get this question because someone wants us to justify why we shouldn't hit our horse because it's bitten us or it's kicked us or it's just pin its ears at us. And that's what I mean, is like, ask yourself why you feel the need to be punishing your horse in that way, and also ask yourself why you're in that situation or why your horse is expressing that behavior. With my ranch hand, like, Luke has kicked him twice because the ranch hand pushes him around. And it's not that Luke has just kicked him out of the blue. We all know that Luke is extremely sensitive. He does not like to be pushed around. He does not like even really to be touched by most people. He doesn't even want your attention if you're not me. I'll be honest about that. But he tells you before you've even entered the stall. And that's just something that a lot of people are not going to register.
Yeah, and I definitely think that is a really good point too, that, you know, most people ask that question because they're like, well, but I had this situation, and if I didn't hit my horse, I would have died. And I'm like, well, use your brain and get out of the situation safely. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is training so that those situations don't happen. And when they do, like, for instance, if I were in a stall with Zoe and she pinned her ears and bared her teeth and ran at me like she was going to kill me, I would probably defend myself until I could get out of the stall, and that might mean hitting her. But that's not a training scenario. That is an emergency situation. That is life or death, and you must do what you have to do to get out of that situation. It goes without saying, and oh God, Caine and I got into a Facebook argument with somebody, and we both talked about this at great length.
Like, she just wants so badly to hit her horses and justify why she should be punishing her horses. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, the whole point of training is to set up that situation so that when I go into Zoe's stall, she doesn't do those things because she's comfortable, she's calm, and she's confident. Like, that's the whole purpose of training, is to teach our animals how to behave in our world that we have chosen for them. And so it's so frustrating to me when people are like, yeah, but what if the barn is burning down? I have to get them out. Like, am I supposed to just give them treats? Like,
oh my God, no, this lady was like, well, what if I hand the horse to a student, or a student starts handling treats with the horse, or giving treats to the horse, and the horse starts biting her? And it's like, oh my God, how have you not taught your students to appropriately administer treats and your horses to appropriately receive treats? Like, that just called yourself out.
The thing that was most frustrating, we're getting a bit gossipy now, but the thing that was the most frustrating for me about that conversation was that this individual was commenting on my training and saying that I was being irresponsible by teaching people how to do positive reinforcement, because if her student, started giving the horse treats, what if she got bitten? And I was like, all due respect, everything I do is based in prevention and making that not happen, and it is all about safety. And if your student is not following what I am talking about, like, there's nothing else I can do. I've done everything I can to set people up for success with all the information that I have to keep yourself safe. You start in protected contact, you teach the cues, you only reward the good behaviors that you want, and everything else, you either replace or you go through an extinction process or incompatible behaviors, blah, 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 all of that stuff. And if your student is getting bitten, it is because something else is going wrong and they have not appropriately approach the situation using the principles that I discussed. And they were like, well, how can you say that? You're the one that's training them. You call yourself a trainer. And I'm like, okay, lady, you're their trainer who actually is at their barn. And if your horse, or if the horse is biting your student, then aren't you a bad trainer too? And she was like, well, what if I couldn't be there? And I was like, I'm an entire state away. How could I be there? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But that's that logic that just pisses me off to no end, because it's like, you're using fallacy after fallacy and points that are so confirmationally biased. It's not even worth having the conversation. I did block her from my page, by the way, so I just relieved some tension.
Anyone can find an excuse for anything, we'll put it that way.
Yes, and that's at the point where you're like, okay, we're done arguing. You're past reason because I am being reasonable. And the things that you and I have both laid out are very reasonable and based in science and have years of backing, and to be like, nope, you should still hit them for biting. I'm like, no, if the horse is biting, there is another reason. It is not for lack of being hit that the horse bites. That doesn't make any fucking sense at all. But sorry, that just made me so mad, and I'm like secondhand mad again from it. But anyway.
Well, on the next note, because I had mentioned how I had actually accidentally deleted one of Nova's behaviors, I did find my notes on that.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, tangented hard.
No, we both do it. It's totally fine.
It's your fault. You brought it up.
So it does. I do have to correct myself. I said that it took me 2 months to retrain it. It actually only took me a month. It felt like 2 years.
I bet.
So Nova, one of his very first behaviors that he learned, I say first as in it was at the very beginning. Of course, there were a multitude of things that led up to even creating this behavior. I first taught this behavior to Lily many years ago, that she side passes with me on the ground by me just saying side. Lily only does this one direction on the ground. She does it both ways under saddle. That's just her. So I thought that was kind of just a lucky thing that I'd really only ever be able to teach that to Lily, to do that on the ground purely off of voice command. Again, this was many years ago that I taught it to her. I've successfully taught this to Nova with actually an even better response. I think his side pass is better than hers. Don't tell Lily. And he also does it both directions on the ground and under saddle. Mm-hmm. And so he side passes when I say side. Typically, I will be standing just slightly in front of his shoulder and stepping sideways with him in the direction that he's going to go. That's right back into the beginning of how I taught him to side pass under saddle, that the direction was which shoulder I was standing at and which direction I was moving. So onward. Nova is very animated with his hips. He loves to swing his hips every single which way. And on top of him knowing his side pass, he also will spin in a circle depending on the direction you tell him to go. You basically just draw a circle in the air with your finger and you say circle, and he'll go the direction that you draw the circle. It's very, very fun.
That's so cool.
It's so much fun. I picked it up from watching a Cavalia performance that a bunch of Arabians were going around in a circle, and she would tell them to circle, and they would spin.
That's so
and it was just so awesome.
You need a video immediately, ma'am.
I have plenty.
I need that
I'll
ASAP.
have to send them to you.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's super fun. But, putting those behaviors together, but also just the reason I was able to shape those behaviors in the first place, Nova just can really swing his hind end. He has never tried to kick someone. He will never try to kick someone. That's just not in his DNA to kick. But I work with a lot of horses that aren't Nova, so if I see a hip swinging towards me really fast, I'm gonna jump away, and I don't want it to happen again. That's just my innate response to that.
Right. That's how I almost broke my foot, is because I didn't put Zoe's hip target on stimulus control, and I paid for it by not being able to walk on my foot for like 2 weeks.
Yes, that's what's happening. So, I definitely have it under much more control ever since this accident.
After
this
that,
accident
I was
I think 3 months ago.
Yeah, after that, I was like, we are immediately putting that on stimulus control the second I can walk, so that doesn't happen again, because I just walked to her hip, and she swung it, and because like I said earlier, she loves that behavior, and I didn't have the cue clear that, I can walk around her while she's standing, and so when I walked to her hip, she just automatically swung her hips towards me without my hand being there, and then when I reached up to catch her, she kept going because that was the cue, and I was like, damn it. And so that's why we're putting it on a vocal cue, but that's fine. And she stepped on my foot and put all of her sideways weight on it, and we thought I snapped all of my tendons, and now I have really bad ankle problems. But immediately after that, I was like, we are coming up with a plan for differentiation on that behavior, because that cannot happen ever again, and that's so dangerous. And that is called slow learning.
Well, I mean, with Nova, it's like, he means so well. If he ever was aware that he was causing harm to somebody, he immediately jumps away.
Oh, same for Zoe. Yeah.
But it's also, we had done those behaviors so often, he got really, really confident with how much he could swing his butt.
Yep.
And that, he figured out, I'm not going to knock the person over. The person's not going to do anything to me. He just, simply, he got super confident. But Nova, who's 2/3 of his 24 hours of his day, every single day, out in a pasture with his friends, Nova still is the horse who, when I let him loose in the arena, some days he just runs and runs and runs. He has so much energy every single day. And, on those days when he has a little bit extra, those hips swing even more. He was running around. He'd come bouncing up to me. He'd stop. He'd maybe do a little circle if I asked him to, and then he'd go running off again. Well, on one of those times, he came bounding up to me. He swung his left hip to me. I was on the left side of him. It caught me so off guard. I was holding a lead rope in my hand. I swung the lead rope at him. It happened to brush against his hip, and he went galloping off. So,
Oops.
In that instance, it did what I wanted, right? I didn't want that in my face. It sent him off. I didn't really intend to send him off. It was just kind of like an instinct reaction, but also oh my God, please don't do this.
Yeah.
Guess what? It deleted the behavior like that.
Yeah.
That direction, me being on his left side and him side passing to me to the left. He would not offer it again. I was like, okay, it's just today. We're going to try again tomorrow. Didn't happen the next day. Didn't happen the day after that. After a week, I was like, holy crap. This horse.
What have I done?
Yes, what have I done? I was traumatized. He was traumatized. He's like, oh my God, you punished me. I was like, oh my God, I swung a rope at you. I didn't punish you. But to him, a horse who has literally only had interactions with plus R, to him, that was punishment. Because that was just, to me, that's not a lot of pressure. But to him, that was an overused
I think
pressure.
that's a really important thing to pay
he would
attention
still
to.
side pass to the right. If I stood on the right side of him, it would happen totally fine. But if I put myself on the left and I said side, he'd just walk forward. Because that was the response. The rope swung, it sent him forward and away. And it took me a month to just so slowly and tediously and literally beg him on my hands and knees to bring that behavior back. And that was probably the most humbling moment I've ever had in my entire life. I swear, I was distraught. I really thought that I had permanently deleted that behavior.
Yeah, well, and I think that touches on a really important part of that, is that it is not up to you what is punishment or what is aversive to an animal. It is up to them. His history was, none of that. And then when you did something scary, aversive, or painful, he was like, nope. And that's where, like, with people that are like, well, I'm scratching my horse's reinforcement. If that horse has ulcers or has a bad association with the area or something, it's not going to be reinforcing. It is all up to the animal. Just like you like certain foods, I like certain foods. If somebody tried to reinforce my behavior with Brussels sprouts, I would throw them at them. So, you would have to reward me with a Snickers bar. So, I think that's a really important thing. And also that, you have to be very deliberate with your training. And I did not have a rope in my situation. But I did have some wherewithal that I was like, oh, I don't want to punish her for that, but this sucks so bad because, her whole weight was on me, and I just wanted to ram my elbow into her hip and be like, get off. But I was like, okay. And then I just put my hands on her hip and pushed her until she stepped off. And then I was like, okay, treats on the ground. I have to go before I can't walk out of this field.
And then, with instances like that, you have no choice, but you have to consider lesson horses. How much of their shutting down is noticeable or even recognized?
Exactly.
With our plus our horse, that happened so quickly. Some lesson horses literally are just push buttons because they're so shut down, and how much it took to get them there. Because not every horse is sensitive like Nova or Zoe. A lot of horses can take a lot more pressure than they can, and even still, it happens.
Yes.
So it's that's food for thought for you guys.
Yeah, it's absolutely dependent on the individual and their history. And with Zoe, when that happened, I do want to clarify because I realized what I said and that could be mistaken. I left the pile of treats on the ground because that's her end of session cue, and in all fairness, I cued her for that behavior. So it wasn't intentional on my part. I didn't mean to, but in her mind, I cued her, and that was bad training on my part because I hadn't put it on stimulus control. So she did the right thing. There was no reason to punish her for that. I walked towards her hip and then I put my hands up. That's her cue. And so I can't punish her for that because, what happened with Nova, he was like, look, here, and then you accidentally punished him, and then he was like, fuck, wrong answer, not doing that again. And so, and that's where, we have those two scenarios, and then I had to go back and work on the same thing, but the reverse. I was like, okay, don't do it anymore. And you were like, okay, please, God, do it again. And so it all depends, and you have to be safe. And obviously Caine was more safe than I was because they actually protected themselves, and I got stepped on and I was wearing dumb shoes, but she stepped on the side of my foot, on all my metatarsals, and ripped everything in my foot. And it blew up before I got back to my house, which was a short walk. And I was like, oh God. But anyway, not the point. So yeah, are you still there?
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
It cut out for a second, and I was like, were we good? But yeah, so anyway, I think our injuries and our stupidity is a good place to end. I don't know if these
to wrap up our what is this now, 8 hours of chatting?
Yes, no kidding. This has been a long series, but I'm glad that we finally got it. And the next episode that we'll be doing together is over problem horses. And
yes.
I'm probably going to take a break for a hot second because I've got some other topics that I want to cover. But
by all means.
Yes, and our schedules are also dumb to get together. But at some point in the near future, I will be asking on, Instagram, and Caine will too, about like what questions you guys want us to answer regarding problem horses. Like, because we didn't really touch on. And I also,
oh my God, I'm so sorry to cut you off.
You're
but
good.
We did try that, like asking questions or opening the floor for questions about problem horses, and everyone's giving questions about problems like bucking or my horse won't go forward. And I just want to specify, like, I can totally answer those, but if you want specialty, my specialty training is problem horses. So please.
Yeah, and
for my sanity.
I mean, go ahead and explain like what you're talking about, because that might not be clear to everyone, myself included, because I classify problem horses as ones who buck and bite or are wildly shut down, or you just you can't handle them.
Okay, so it's definitely, yes, a horse who is going to excessively buck even after, having work done. But, a lot of times people send horses to me that haven't had that work done, and then they get the work done and it actually fixes them. But still, if you are asking your horse, like one of these future questions is going to be, my pony has a habit of bucking when someone asks for the canter. That's not a problem horse. You have a problem. You do not have a problem horse.
Right.
A problem horse, or very simply, maybe just a challenging horse or a difficult horse, is going to be like horses like Uma, who is a deaf Mustang who was literally unbroke, or Nova, who was a 7-year-old stallion who had never been handled in his entire life, or seen other horses or been around people. Lily was a problem horse at one point in her life when I first started working with her. She was pretty much unrideable by most people. She had so much energy and she was very stubborn, but putting that energy and stubbornness together just made her a nightmare to most people. Some might consider her an average chestnut mare, but I have my feelings on that as well. But that's what I mean, is horses who genuinely present a problem that most people are not going to be able to handle or manage. They take typically I need to take unconventional routes to routes ROUTES
routes
to solve their problems.
Yes.
Like basically my job is that I am willing to ride the horse that most other trainers do not want to.
Yeah. So there you go, everyone. That will be our next episode. And if you want to go ahead and maybe comment on when this episode goes up on the Instagram, EquiTheory, you can comment in the caption on that post, or you can send them to the EquiTheory Instagram's DM, or you could...
Or on any of my posts as well.
Yeah, there you go. I just like to have them like kind of all in one place, because, and of course I'll ask on my story, on my stories for both accounts when we actually go to start doing the episode. But like I said, we're probably going to take a break from guest episodes, because I do want to have Alicia Harlov on soon, and I emailed her 2 months ago and was like, I'm coming up with my questions list, I'll send it to you, and then I didn't. And it's because I've been working on this and other things, and so I just kind of want to take a break from Caine, though you are the star of the podcast at the moment. But I want to do some other topics, and then we'll come back to that soon, so keep an eye out for those questions. And with that, I think we're gonna go ahead and let old Caine get off the phone. So if there's anything you want to plug, I'm sorry it's at the end of the episode, but
I just wanted to say that I had so much fun. If I need to plug anything, it's that I'm at Meyer Horsemanship on Instagram. Meyer is spelled Meyer. I've already told my website, and I have that linked everywhere. The only reason I don't want to repeat it is because I'm actually kind of in the process of buying a domain, so the website will likely change. But yes, I've had a pleasure. It's kind of become like the Jill and Caine podcast.
Yes,
so it's
has.
Reasonable to take a break from me.
Yes, that's kind of what I'm feeling, and I was like, oh god, I'm so behind on my Patreon questions last week, and when we couldn't get our schedule together, I was like, okay, this might not be a bad thing. But yeah, I've had a great time too, because I think you definitely bring an awesome element of bluntness and like just an incredible wealth of biomechanics and your experience with various different types of horses, like beyond breed, but just like experiences and history. And so your perspective is just always a pleasure.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Anyway, I think we'll go ahead and end it here. Okay, guys, end of episode. Jill here to say once again, the episode is over now. And if you want, you can check us out at EquiTheory and Jet EquiTheory on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and I think that's it. Patreon is also a place you can find EquiTheory, and you can support me and the horses, get training advice, life advice, and access to a really dope community. I'm working on putting up a Discord server, which is exciting. I haven't worked out all of the logistics or exactly what I'm going to do with it just yet, but it is going to be a really cool place because the patrons are awesome. We end up having like 4-hour Zoom calls, and by like hour 3, we're just talking about nonsense and just interacting like people instead of so much like trainer student, you know? And so I really prefer that dynamic. I think it's awesome. And you guys send me incredible resources and open my eyes to some other things that I don't know about. And it's just a really awesome learning opportunity. And I think it's going to be great once we get that going, because Patreon is not the best platform in the world. It works for what it is. And I hate adding another like media platform, but I think having a Discord server will be really cool. And I've got plans for YouTube videos coming out and on the Jet EquiTheory channel, but be sure you subscribe to the EquiTheory channel so that Mama can make that monetization, please. I need it to be a real channel. But yeah, anyway, I think that is going to wrap up this episode. Just be sure to follow me literally everywhere, you little stalker. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to check out Caine's stuff, and I will catch you guys next Tuesday.